Chapter 1 Little Art of Cloud and Rain. Don't forget. Even in death, you must not forget. A strange yet familiar voice seemed to come from deep in the clouds. Again and again, echoing, layering, relentless. Must not forget? Must not forget what? He suddenly woke. Just as usual, his entire body was soaked, the clothing sticking to the skin uncomfortably. He sat up, the stars and dark sky above his head reminding his that there was still a long time before morning. A gust of wind blew over, whooshing icily. This dream again. Habitually blowing out a long breath, it was still early, go back to sleep. He laid down again. Emoji, remember to water for me. We made an agreement at the beginning of this month. This year's harvest is depending on you. Before he could walk to the opening of the mountain, Zwa heard someone yelling from far away. When he looked over, it was a 50-something old man, dark and thin. He was poking around in the field. If he didn't look closely, he wouldn't see there was a person there. The old man's nickname was Old Black. His real name was unknown. He was the oldest among the outer sect disciples of. Zwa wiped at the sweat on his forehead, replying, "Won't forget. Don't worry, tomorrow, it's your turn." His body was like a stalk of bamboo. The purple robe of the outer sect disciples as it hanged on his body was loose. In contrast to the slipperiness of his speech was his wooden face that looked like a zombie, dark and gloomy. Zwamo's zombie face was his specialty. At the beginning, everyone stayed far away from him, but gradually they found out, other than his face which people didn't like, his temper and personality were both extremely good, at which point more people interacted with him. After 2 years, he was the most popular among the outer sect disciples. Old Black's face lit up in joy, his mouth hurriedly complimenting, "Good, good, good. Your specialty, Old Black, has never seen anything else like it." Zwamo's, the little art of cloud and rain, was special. The third level of the little art of cloud and rain, it was the only one in the outer sect disciples. And it was with this that he almost had a monopoly on the duty of making rain for all the Ling fields of the sect. The little art of cloud and rain wasn't a complicated spell, everyone knew how to do it. Its main use was creating rain for the Ling fields. One only needed 3 to 5 days to learn the first level. The second level, it could be easily accomplished in 1 or 2 years. But starting from the third level, it required the ability of comprehension from each individual. In all of the outer sect disciples of Wukong Sword Sect, only Zwa had successfully comprehended it. After the little art of cloud and rain reached the third level, its effectiveness increased dramatically and could drastically increase the amount produced by the Ling grains and Ling vegetables. Because of that, after he achieved the third level, his position in the sect flipped around. His name went from Little Zombie Mo to Emoji. Zwa waved his hand to bid farewell to Old Black. He bared his teeth and shifted the bag on his back. His shoulders ached. On his back was 300 caddies of Ling grain, which almost broke his thin and weak shoulders. A thin and weak zombie carried a cloth bag on his back that was multiple times bigger than his body as he moved with difficulty along the mountain path. Lugging 300 caddies of Ling grain, he wheezed his way down to the entrance to the mountain. Just past the mountain gate, he threw the cloth bag on his shoulders to the ground as his entire body collapsed down, his breath racing. After resting for a short period and he recovered some energy, he stood up and carefully took out a grass-yellow paper crane from his bosom. The paper crane was the size of a palm, folded from yellow grass paper. Drawn on it were cinnabar seals. He put in Ling energy and the paper crane enlarged. It was slightly larger than a real crane. Thin stalks of bamboo made up the skeleton and a layer of yellow grass paper was pasted on top. Drawn over the entire body were cinnabar seals that curved like tadpoles. But it was clear that the craftsmanship wasn't very good. Many places that were pasted together were frayed. The quality of the yellow paper was very low as fragments of grass could be seen everywhere on the paper. Putting the cloth bag onto the back of the paper crane from the ground. Inside the mountain, the outer sect disciples were restricted from flying. These 2 years, Zwa had cursed this rule inside countless times. Clumsily climbing onto the back of the paper crane, The sound of creaking and groaning as the bamboo rods of the paper crane as it bent instantly sounded. He paused in his motions. After a while, seeing that the paper crane showed no indication of collapsing, he released a breath. "Xiao Huang, you can't break down at this time." Zuemo patted the head of the paper crane as it swayed and left the ground. The creaking of the bamboo and paper sounded once again. It was as though the paper crane was drunk. The flight path was strange, suddenly high, suddenly low, suddenly left before turning right. It wheezed as it followed the mountain road forward. Zuemo had a very steady seat. He was very experienced. This was the lowest quality of flying paper cranes. Its maximum load wasn't even 400 caddies. The weight right now was extremely dangerous. But this impotence paper crane was something that all other outer sect disciples were envious of. In the outer sect disciples, he was the first one to have a steed. Of course, as to whether a flying paper crane counted as a steed, that wasn't in the limits of Zuemo's consideration. In the midst of the creaking and crying, after swerving for 10 hours, when Zuemo's zombie face was slightly pale, Dong Fu was far away on the horizon. In the midst of the clouds, Dong Fu faded in and out. Once upon a time, Dong Fu Jinren broke off the peak with one sword strike and used the bottom half of the mountain as the base of his seat, creating Dong Fu. After 500 years, Dong Fu had developed into one of the 13 primary towns of Tianyujie. 3,000 jie of the Xiozhe, Tianyujie couldn't even be ranked. It was only a minor jie, its history just 1,500-something years. 1,500 years ago, Tianyu Xianren found and took control of this jie. She used her own name to name it Tianyujie. Tianyu Xianren was one of Kunlun, and so Tianyujie logically became one of the jie that were governed by Kunlun Jing. After that, some other Jinren came to Tianyujie to start their own sects, and it gradually became the present situation. The paper crane creaked and groaned as it struggled to fly to the base of Dong Fu Mountain. During the journey, he was able to hear the laughter of other people. A thin zombie, sitting on a similarly thin, drunken paper crane. The scene caused many people to laugh. Zuemo sat dignified, his expression natural as though he was the perfect zombie. In reality, on the inside, he was drooling at the flying steeds that went over his head. Those were true steeds. The one with the gray body and red beak was a red-beaked goose. The back of the goose was wide and soft. Sitting on it, one could almost not feel any shaking. It was called the greatest experience. That lump under the feet was lucky magic cloud. Traveling on a cloud was so free and outstanding. The silver hovering on the back of that Xiozhe was thunder wings, the lightning flowering and the speeds like lightning. Do you want to experience speed? He could recite the slogans smoothly. But he was only able to recite the advertisements. The thing that shocked everyone the most was a 1,000-wings boat that slowly sailed above his head. The entire boat was like a mountain as it flew across his head. Zuemo only felt his eyes become dark, and when he raised his head, the light of the Jinji at the bottom of the black bottom were barely detectable. The greatest crime of all Xiozhe was extravagance. Zuemo couldn't help swearing inside, but when he saw the other Xiozhe scatter sorrowfully, his mood instantly became better. After flying for another 2 hours, one person plus one crane finally reached the base of Dong Fu Mountain. With Xiao Huang's impotent flying ability that stuck to right above the ground, flying up Dong Fu was just wishful thinking. He climbed down from the paper crane and loaded off the bag. When he took down the paper crane, cracks could be seen on the surface. Zuemo sighed in grief inside. Did he have to buy a new one? This thought made his flesh hurt deeply. Narrowing his eyes to look at Dong Fu that was over the clouds, and the winding and countless stone steps, and then a look at the bag beside his feet, Zuemo's legs started trembling. "Brother, do you need help?" A shadow came across Zuemo's eyes. A man whose half-naked body was steely muscled came over. "How much?" Zuemo asked alertly. His eyes scanned around the surrounded. Receiving encouragement from his look, a few other men sitting at the side stood up. Noticing that some of his own profession seemed to want to come over, the man's heart tightened and he hurriedly stated, 3 first grade. 3 1 grade meant 3 pieces of first-grade jingsher. Zuemo exclaimed in shock, "Kill me!" and followed decisively, "Just 2. If you're willing, then do it. If not, never mind. At this time, if he made out a shocked expression, he would have had both sound and look. But it was hopeless for Zhuamo's zombie face, which didn't move, and the atmosphere instantly became weird. Too fake. The strong man jerked his mouth. But seeing the other people that were restless in the surroundings, he gritted his teeth and crisply nodded, "Fine." Finishing, his hand that was as big as a fan reached for the cloth bag on the ground. Zhuamo shouted, "Wait. What? Make a contract first?" Zhuamo took out a jade strip. "Just two, what contract does it need?" The strong man muttered disapprovingly. "For safety. Otherwise, with my body, if you run, I can't catch up with you." Zhuamo's face was still expressionless, and his voice was still carrying a smile. Helplessly, the strong man could only sign a contract with Zhuamo. Seeing this, the other people finally left. Finishing, the man picked up the bag on the ground. The 300 caddy back in his hands seemed weightless. Halfway up the mountain, Zhuamo struggled to crawl up the mountain, his entire body soaked in sweat. The brawny man said with a face full of disdain, "Your endurance really sucks." Then he urged, "Can't you be faster? I still want to do 2 more orders today. At this speed, it'll be lucky if we get there before dark." Zhuamo felt as though he was a fish that had been taken out of the water. He felt he was suffocating. He put his butt on the stone stairs and panted roughly, one breath disconnected from the next. "I can't." The man instantly panicked. "It can't be like this. Are you trying to ruin my business?" Zhuamo's eyes rolled and he stated expressionlessly, "You can see it. I really don't have any more energy." The man furiously ranted, "Taking your business, I really lost a lot today." Finishing, he grabbed Zhuamo with one hand and put him under his arm, lengthening his stride and started to jog up the stone stairs. "You guys who cultivate your body, it really is admirable." Zhuamo, who was taking advantage, said heartlessly, "What's admirable? Just eating based on strength. Right now, I'm at the 5th level of Lianqi. Once I get to Zhuji, I can take more orders. These days, it's hard to make a living." The muscled man couldn't help but sigh. "Yeah, living isn't easy." Zhuamo felt sorrow in his heart. He suddenly remembered that 1,000-wing boat he saw on the road and couldn't help but ask, "Hey, what's with that 1,000-wing boat? Never seen it before." "That's the moving palace of Qi Jinren. You have to be careful and not provoke him." The man gave a friendly reminder, "If you see women dress in white with a veil, you have to respectfully stay away. They are all concubines of Qi Jinren and have terrible tempers. Many people offended them and they didn't have good endings." The man's strength was astonishing. One hand holding the 300 caddy bag, the other hand Zhuamo as he spoke without showing any sign of exhaustion. "That's true. Us little people, to offend them is to seek death." Zhuamo agreed. The strides of the man were very big and his speed much faster than Xiao Huang. It only took him an hour to finish climbing up the winding stone stairs. Zhuamo crisply paid him 2 1-grade jingshi. The man took the jingshi before turning to rush down the mountain. "Living isn't easy." Zhuamo looked at the back of the man and expressionlessly concluded. Zhuamo was very familiar with Dongfu. He took up the bag, a few turns, and he found his destination. This was a store that specialized in purchasing ling grains. It was a small storefront. Outside the door there hanged a small flag. On it were 2 words, "Ling grains." The seal arrangement on the flag guaranteed that the 2 words could be seen from far away even at night. 300 caddies of 2nd-grade ling grain. To this kind of store, it was just a small piece of business. The storekeeper didn't even bother to come out to give a greeting, only sending a shop assistant. 30 pieces of 2nd-grade jingji? The shop assistant had no intentions of bargaining. Zhuamo also knew he didn't have any room to bargain and very crisply nodded. This price was slightly low, but it was the same at any other store unless he could bring 10,000 caddies or more of ling grain at one time. Then he would have the right to bargain on the price. Taking away the portion that needed to be given up to the sect, 300 caddies of ling grain was the result of his year of hard effort. 30 pieces of 2nd-grade jingji, for him, it was a large sum of money. Having 30 pieces of 2nd-grade jingji as he walked on the street, Zhuamo felt that all the passerbys' eyes were like thieves. The streets of Dongfu were wide. In the sky, there were also many houses of different colors and shapes. Those were also stores. But that was the high-end district. Without a high-grade steed, Xiuzhe who could not fly on a sword couldn't enter even if they wanted to. Some high-end stores were like a small island floating in the sky, flowers and grasses blooming, the music streaming out. That was a place that Mo wouldn't even dream about. He always only looked at what was in his bowl. Chapter 2. Jade's stick blurred like a fantasy, the lights floating. Dongfu was just as beautiful at night as it was in daytime. The lanterns on the two sides of the street gave off bright and gentle light. From the sky, there were the barks and squeals of the Ling beasts and the lights coming off the flying talismans which were even more attractive than a meteor shower. The cool night didn't lessen the people, but made it even more busy. The merchants all gathered sufficient energy and the shop workers in each store wore uniforms as they stood on either side of the door, one person holding a copper bell, one person holding an 8 divination mirror. The worker holding the copper bell sent out a spell and a clear voice spread out from the copper bell. This store sells talismans, all kinds of talismans at great prices. Whether or not you are a Lianqi apprentice or a skilled Jindan, this store can fulfill your needs. Engraved on the copper bell was a clear sound incantation. The voice was mild and moderate, and definitely wouldn't be harsh on the ears. Even if it was heard for a long time, the listener wouldn't be bothered. The worker with the 8 divination mirror cooperated beautifully and had made out a spell at the same time. The 8 divination mirror flashed and above his head, holograms of different started to flash, realistic and moving. And as the sound of the bell changed, the holograms above his head changed as well like a stoplight. This was a mirage spell, producing illusions and tricking others to thinking it was real. If it was two stores that faced each other, a frequent scene was the workers from both stores glaring at each other, the bells swinging rapidly, the lights of the 8 divination mirror also flashing. The same scenes were occurring on all around the street. 5th grade secret paradise. Has 1 Ling spring, 500 ping 2, full of Ling energy. No matter for raising animals or planting Ling grains or grasses, we guarantee you have a good harvest. 2 million 5th grade Jingshire. Don't miss it, it won't come again. This store is selling all kinds of high-grade Ling herbs. 1,000-year-old store, quality is guaranteed. All of the medicine of this store has been inspected by high-level medicine professors in the Tian Xian School of Medicine. Please don't worry. Do you want to get into Ez Hui Sword Sect? This training center takes in students all year round, passing on all kinds of beginning spells. Personal lessons by experienced sword shio of Ez Hui Sword Sect. Guaranteed to pass the first time. Why are you hesitating? Come try. Those who register now will receive 15% off. This was the city with no night, the primary town Dongfu. Mo wasn't unfamiliar with this prosperous primary town, but he wasn't used to it. He didn't come often. If he hadn't brought a flying paper crane, it was hard to even make a trip to Dongfu. Even the most beautiful street would have an intersection. Mo stared dazedly. He was lost. Damn it, lost again. He hit his head in frustration and hurt. Helplessly, Mo walked to a banyan tree and lifted his face. On the branches, he saw many small red birds. The little birds were entirely red and had long crimson tails. When they flew, it was like there was a stream of fire behind them, so they were called flaming birds. They were intelligent and psychic. They could understand human speech and were good at learning. Many cities used them as road signs and direction. However, it wasn't a free service. Mo bore the pain as he threw 1 piece of 1st grade Jingshire. A flaming bird spread its wings and swooped down from the tree, accurately catching the Jingshire and swallowed it into its stomach. Free market? Mo shouted. The flaming bird flew a few circles around his head below, heading in one direction. Mo hurried to keep up behind the bird. The flaming bird didn't fly very quickly. The long tail feathers threw off red light that glowed brightly in the night. The red light spread out in the air and quickly disappeared. Passing through the lantern-lit streets, quietly listening to the calls of peddling, quietly looking at the holograms changing at the two sides of the street, and thinking about how he felt when he had opened his eyes 2 years ago, unconsciously, Mo became silent. He sighed in his heart and a slightly sorrowful mood pervaded. The clear call of the flaming bird startled him awake. When he saw the free market not far away, his mood lifted. The flaming bird circled a few times around and turned to leave with a trail of red glowing dots behind. Zhuemo waved his hand at the leaving flaming bird. The free market was the most common place for low-level xiuzhe. The so-called free market, it was due to the fact that anyone could put up a stall and set things. They only had to buy a mini-room and pay some fees before they could freely sell. The price of a mini-room was much lower than a storefront. Usually when the mini-room was collapsed, it was only palm-sized and easy to transport. Many xiuzhe would buy one to carry around. Then they didn't have to worry about where to sleep when they went out. Buying here was much cheaper than normal stores, but one had to spend time to find them. The free market was like a gigantic weiqi board, divided into squares. Each square could hold 10 mini-rooms which were arranged 5 back-to-back with another 5. Very quickly, Zhuemo found his goal. "Oh, and you came?" The store owner was a male about 27 or 8. He had a pointy head, his 2 eyes moving rapidly. He was called Fujin. His potential was average, and he didn't have much interest in cultivation. Right now, he only was on the 3rd level of lianqi, so he decided to start a business. He was skilled at managing and had a variety of roads. He basically had everything, no matter if it was low-level talismans or some spells. He could get all of them. Zhuemo didn't waste words. "Did what I want arrive yet?" Of course, of course." Fujin patted his thin chest and laughed. "What Imo wants, I don't dare not to do my best." Finishing, he started to dig through a little pouch at his waist. Zhuemo looked with red eyes at the small cloth pouch at Fujin's waist. The little cloth bag might be nondescript, but it was a 3rd-grade 1,000 treasure pouch. But very quickly, Zhuemo's eyes were attracted to that small object held in Fujin's hands. A piece of blue-green jade, about 1 finger wide, 2 knuckles long. It was a jade stick. But emoji, don't blame me for not reminding you. This Ling plant jade stick has 5 kinds of 5-element spells. However, not many can learn all of them. Fujin said seriously, "With emoji's 3rd-level abilities at Little Art of Rain and Cloud, why don't buy a water spell jade stick? Don't be irritated at my chattiness. But I've seen a lot these years and understand some. One ability is enough to overcome all." Zhuemo solemnly responded, "Many thanks, Fuj." The other was looking out for him. He knew that. Seeing Zhuemo still resolute, Fujin didn't continue. He handed the jade stick to him. "Already said the price, 20 pieces of 2nd-grade jingshe." Zhuemo straightforwardly gave the jingshe. 20 pieces of 2nd-grade jingshe was a significant piece of business. Fujin's mood improved and he smiled, teasing, "If Emoj can learn all of it, hey, then become a Ling plant farmer. That treatment. Hey, don't forget to help out this brother then." Zhuemo also chuckled and raised his hands together expressionlessly. "Thanks, Fu Little G for the words. For Ling plant farmers, it has to be at least having 3 kinds of spells at the 3rd level. It isn't that easy." The two finished their transaction in happiness. The majority of the jingshe on his body left, but Zhuemo didn't feel any pain. He carefully put the jade stick next to his skin. This was a treasure. After purchasing the jade stick, Zhuemo prepared to return to the mountain. Even though traveling at night was slightly hard, but if he stayed overnight at Dongfu, he would need to spend money again. Without the Ling grains, Xiao Huang seemed to become lighter and nimbler as it carried Zhuemo and wheezed as it flew in the direction of Wukong Mountain. When he returned to his residence at Wukong Mountain, it was deep in the night. Under the stars, Zhuemo laid on the roof, his entire body aching. His fingers grasped the jade stick in front of his eyes. He narrowed his eyes, his mood unspeakably content. At this Sword River Prefecture, there were many people that farmed. Like Wukong Sword Sect, about 70% of the outer sect disciples would choose to farm when they choose their tasks. The sect would also give out some methods of farming. Little Art of Cloud and Rain was one of them. But the sect only gave out the most basic. Wukong Sword Sect was a sect for sword shio. They had many sword arts, but the amount they had on any other arts were pitiful. Farming was a deep and vast topic. Zhuemo, who had continued as an outer sect disciple for 2 years, had a deep understanding of this. The jade stick included 5 types of 5-element spells. They were all spells relating to farming. One of those included was Little Art of Cloud and Rain. When he saw this, the stone in his heart landed. Worth it. The elaboration inside the stick about Little Art of Cloud and Rain was more comprehensive than what he knew and even more profound. Fu Jin wasn't wrong. Being a master at one thing was more realistic. But Zuemo had his own ideas. If he could learn all 5 kinds of the 5-element spells and if 3 kinds reached the 3rd level, he could become a Ling plant farmer. If Little Art of Cloud and Rain hadn't broke into the 3rd level, he wouldn't have had the idea. But since he could comprehend the 3rd level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain, that showed that he had a bit of a talent at 5-element spells. If he had given up all the Ling grains to exchange for contribution points from the sect, he could receive somewhat of a good sword manual. But he didn't do that. What did he need a sword manual for? To chop wood? In comparison, farming spells were more useful. Even if he didn't learn all of them, the more he learned, the more abilities he had. The sect didn't have much, but uncultivated Ling fields were everywhere. With enough Ling fields, he could grow more Ling grains and get more Jingshi. Thinking and thinking, Zuemo's head became clearer and his drowsiness disappeared. He sat up and reached out with his palm to touch his face. The muscles on his face were solid and hard like wood. This was why he never had any expression. He didn't care about beauty, he cared about another matter. The faint starlight fell in the yard, giving out a slight silver shimmer like the night mist which rose. Sorrow rose in the eyes of the expressionless Zuemo. 2 years ago, when the head of Wukong Sword Sect was returning to the sect, he had found an unconscious Zuemo and took him back to the sect. From when he woke up, he found that his memory was blank. In the following 2 years, he tried all the ways he could but couldn't find any hints of his memories from 2 years ago. He found the part about him that was strange. It was his face. Frozen like a stone. He could not make any expression. The sect leader said it possibly could be a rare kind of affliction. Because of this face, he wasn't taken in by the other disciples at the beginning and had received quite a few wrongs. But he didn't dislike this face of his. It was one of the only 2 links he could find. Maybe one day, this wooden face could remind him. Who am I? Where is my home? The other link was the dream that always appeared. Whose voice was that? And what he must not forget. But he forgot everything. Sighing in his heart, he shook his head as though he was shaking all those thoughts from his head. He carelessly took up the sound tablet beside him and input Ling energy in. The sound tablet was one of the most popular talismans in this Shio world. It was made up of a base and a round jade tablet. There were seal arrangements and it could receive sound transmissions from large-scale seal arrangements. Zuemo's sound tablet was one of the most simple. A base made out of cedar wood holding a jade tablet the size of a palm. After putting in Ling energy, the surface of the jade tablet shone and flickered though a multitude of colors and a melodious voice came out. Jie once again breaks out in fierce conflict. 12 Xiozha camps simultaneously suffered large-scale attacks from Yaoma. Fatalities are serious. Zhou Ding Sword Sect has found another new Jie. The exploration has already found large amounts of Jing veins. According to those familiar with the matter, there are more than 15 sects that have sent out high-level Xiozha at the same time. Additionally, as there are a high amount of aboriginals on this Jie, industry Zayas predict that this could cause the prince of Xiao slaves on the market to drastically decrease. After slaying famous high-level master Shi Emoda of the Yao race, the Shi Shang sword sect of Shishang Jie has forged the life feather into a flying sword. Today, the flying sword has finally come out of the forge. It is rumored the energy of the sword when it came out expanded 10 miles. High-level experts from forging sects estimate this gold feather sword has reached an astounding 7th grade. The Shishang sword sect has a new weapon. Under the stars, Zuemo listened silently. When he had just woken up, this rough sound tablet had helped him gradually understand this world. And it was from that time that he developed the habit of listening to the sound tablet every day. When his mood was bad or jittery, he would open the sound tablet and listen silently. His mood would then calm down. In the dark sea of the night, the stars shone and a zombie quietly sat on top of the roof and listened to the sound tablet, spellbound. The fourth major stage of cultivation. 1 ping is 3 square meters. Shortened form for Xiozha? Du Tian Shui. The order is Metropolis Sky Blood. But the reason for the name makes it Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia. Yao and Mo are two different things. Yao could be considered equivalent to spirits, and Mo to demons. They are put together as Yaoma because they are both enemies of Xiozha, but they aren't one entity. Chapter 3. The little yard making rain for 50 mu was not an insignificant amount of work for even someone like Zuo who had the cultivation of Lianqi 7th level. Wiping the sweat on his forehead, Zuo expressionlessly said, "All right, this is killing me." Old Black cheerfully gave a thumbs up. Emo's little art of cloud and rain is just as rumored. Finishing, he squatted down with a face full of joy to check the growth of the Ling grain. Zuo calmly accepted the flattery. Old Black's Ling grain had been sturdily planted. Based on how it looked to his eyes, this year's harvest would be good. Adding on the rain he made, it would increase the harvest by 20-something% easily. As payment, he would take 10%, which wasn't insignificant. But when he saw the devoutness and joy that Old Black had when he stared at the Ling grains, for some reason, he himself wasn't happy. Old Black had been an outer sect disciple at Wukong Sword Sect for 20 years. His cultivation was low and he had planted Ling grains in the sect for 20 years. The rent for the Ling fields could be converted to being paid using Ling grains. Each year, one had to give Ling grains to the sect and receive contribution points before they were given continual qualifications to stay and be an outer sect disciple in the sect. If one wanted to learn new spells, then keep increasing the contribution to the sect. Roughly calculating, the amount that would land on a person's hand was pitiful. The Ling grains that were harvested, Old Black were reluctant to even eat. It wasn't easy being an outer sect disciple. Zuo knew that better than anyone. But even like this, even though Wukong Sword Sect was a small sect, there were still countless people that broke their heads trying to get in. Even if it was hard, they could learn something. When they went out later, they could find a good job. To someone like Old Black who didn't have any savings, it was a very steady job. Zuo's days were much better. Even though he was an outer sect disciple, but he had been taken in by the sect leader. No one dared to bully him. His innate skill and comprehension were high. After comprehending the 3rd level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain by himself, his days were increasingly comfortable. Zuo had no great ambitions. There were no clues to his history and birth. Other than living more comfortable days, he didn't have any other wishes. After the labor, he slowly walked back to his own residence. There was only Wukong Sword Sect on Wukong Mountain. There was plenty of space. The entire western peak was sectioned for the residential area of the outer sect disciples. How big one wanted to live, they could pick and construct themselves. But most people would choose the yards that former outer sect disciples had left. Even though people hadn't lived in them for a long time, a good cleaning was all that's needed. Zuo's yard took up a great amount of space. He might be thin and weak, but he liked large things, so at the beginning, he had picked the biggest yard on the western peak. It was a 7th entry compound. Half a mu of fish pond, about 5 mu of Ling fields. The Shixiang that had built this yard definitely would have been a fanatic about farming. There were no fake mountains, no flower beds and courtyard, no other decorations. This Shixiang had changed it all to Ling fields. Other people had no interest in a yard without any sense of beauty, appeal, and incomplete seal formations. Zuo liked it very much. He didn't raise anything in the fish pond. Just using the pond to bath in the summer was a refreshing luxury. Ling fields were good. Zuo calculated it well. The Ling fields that had to be rented from the sect, you had to pay rent. You didn't have to pay rent on the Ling fields in this yard. Other than that, there was a cold spring in the yard. There were considerations in building a residence. Normally, it was best to build on top of a Ling vein. Living constantly in places thick with Ling energy would increase the speed of increasing cultivation. That was the reason those secret paradises were so expensive. But there weren't many places with Ling veins at all, So how would it be given to the outer sect disciples like him? But who could have thought that under this neglected yard, there was a Ling vein? When he had moved in, Zhuo Mo had searched everywhere for a place to meditate. He found a secluded room. When he pushed open the door, a rotten smell had rushed at him. There were many praying mats lying on the ground which all had decayed into a bunch of rotten grass. There was only one mat that had generally kept its shape. After Zhuo Mo put in tremendous effort into cleaning up the seclusion room, only the one mat had been left alone. When Zhuo Mo sat on the mat for the first time, he had frozen in shock. The spot of the mat, the Ling energy was much thicker than anywhere else. Zhuo Mo, whose heart had been beating frantically, had first thought it was due to the mat. But very quickly he found the real reason. Under the mat there was a small side branch of Ling vein. This section of Ling veins was extremely small. It couldn't be detected even one step away from the mat. At this time, he finally understood why that nameless Shixiang had built such a large yard. It was most likely to disguise this little section of Ling vein. This nameless Shixiang quickly became Zhuo Mo's idol. To be able to find this little section of Ling vein on the gigantic western peak and to clear an area for Ling fields himself. Such ability, he didn't seem like an outer sect disciple. After finding the secret of the Ling vein, Zhuo Mo became even more low-key. He knew the logic of not showing off one's wealth. If this bit of Ling vein was found out by anyone else, there would be plotting against him. The best result would be it would be taken away by the sect. In one breath, he put down 30-something mats on the floor of the seclusion room. Other than that, there were 70 or so mats piled in the corners. The colors of the mats varied, and the shapes were all different. All of them were woven by him. The strange habit of little zombie Mo of weaving mats was known throughout the outer sect disciples. Some people, when they wanted to find him to ask for help, they would go out and buy some exquisite mats as gifts. This caused the number of mats to increase and fill the entire seclusion room. But normally, Zhuo Mo persisted in meditating on the old mat that had been preserved. Not rotting after such a long time, this mat might have a special attribute. That unfathomable nameless Shixiang caused him to be careful with anything that had been preserved in the room, and he didn't dare to underestimate anything. The only thing that Zhuo Mo was somewhat regretful about was the Ling fields had been fallow for too long. The grade had dropped once. Right now, it was only first-grade Ling fields. It had taken countless efforts from Zhuo Mo for the vitality to revive. But to once again reach second grade, it needed time. All 5 mu of the Ling fields were planted with Ling grains. The Ling grains were waist-high, the leaf edges saw-toothed and very sharp. If not careful, it was easy to be cut. The Ling grains had been seeded out at the same time, so the height was extremely regular. It was a patch of green, extremely delightful. But at night, it seemed very gloomy. To prevent people from thievery, Zhuo Mo put down Jinji all around the yard. These low-level Jinji didn't have any attack power, but if they were set off, they made a loud fuss. The entire yard was worn down and rotten. Spider webs were everywhere. All the furniture were broken and rotten. The seal arrangements inside the rooms didn't work due to years of neglect. No one competed for it with him. None of this affected Zhuo Mo. He liked sleeping on the roof at night. He meditated in the seclusion room. All the other rooms were kept empty or as storage, holding some normal food. The formations, he got someone to carve a light seal formation for light during the night. He was too lazy to spend the money on anything else. Sitting on the prayer mat, the thick Ling energy in the surroundings made him so comfortable he almost groaned. He controlled his emotions, refocused, and the Ling energy in his body slowly started to revolve. They would burrow into the stalks of Ling grains, even hollowing out the stalk. Average planters had no way of dealing with them. The art of aged gold was a sufficient method. It could let the power of gold permeate inside the Ling grains and kill the pests inside the Ling grains. This was the spell that Zhuo Mo needed the most presently. Other than the contracts he had signed with the other disciples, he himself had rented 50 mu of Ling fields. The harvest from these 50 mu of Ling fields made up a significant amount of his income each year. He read through Art of Aged Gold, word by word, not daring to miss a word. The number of spells he had learned were pitifully little. Learning a completely new spell, he instantly felt it was a challenge. After 2 hours, he made no progress. No matter how he tried, he could not form the aged gold energy that was mentioned in Art of Aged Gold. All the spells in Art of Aged Gold were made using the aged gold energy. Not being able to form the aged gold energy, he couldn't learn any of the spells in Art of Aged Gold. The zombie face was wooden, but that pair of spirited eyes showed a few hints of fierceness. Measurements of area. Approximately 1/15 of a hectare. Senior male fellow student or apprentice. Chapter 4 Absurdity. The light of the sunrise broke through the darkness, the red sun slowly rising. As the light streamed into the seclusion room through the windows, the thin fingers suddenly turned gold. Zhuo put his index finger in front of his red-veined eyes. There seemed to be a gold layer around his index finger. The expressionless Zhuo's eyes were intoxicated. As the sunlight changed direction, leaving his finger, it revealed the original appearance. A layer of light gold energy was wrapped around Zhuo's index finger, slowly turning. The aged gold energy. Just at this time, clang 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 clang. The melodious bell rang 5 times, echoing in the mountains. The gold light on the finger shook and the aged gold energy suddenly collapsed. Zhuo jumped up disheveled from the ground. Damn it! It was already morning. Disregarding his hunger, he ran outside like the wind. At this time, if one was in the sky above Wukong Mountain, they would see hundreds of figures running out of their yards to head to the same place. Zhuo once again cursed inside the rule that outer sect members were not allowed to fly inside the mountain, his feet moving frantically as he sprinted. The Hall of Hearing Principles was located at the Cow Horn Peak of Wukong Mountain. This mountain peak was named due to its shape. When Zhuo burst into the Hall of Hearing Principles, there were already many people sitting down. He randomly found a mat to sit and gasped for air. At the front, a young person was sitting. About 20 or so, his face like jade, his eyes like stars, the light threatening. A dark blue plain robe. Among the tens of people in the room, he was like the crane among the chickens. Su Yu, third ranked among the inner sect disciples. Usually, he was responsible for teaching the outer sect disciple. He was the disciple of Master Xan Yen. He was the one most talented at forging among the inner sect disciples. Other than that, he had a vast knowledge on a variety of miscellaneous topics. Ding! On the table, a bell made from jade rang, the sound rising and spreading out. Zhuo felt his mind jump and become refreshed, the tiredness from staying up all night disappearing. Su Yi Shixiang's green water jade bell set was one of the talismans that Zhuo wanted the most. The rack was made up of red copper. 7 green bells were arranged in order of large to small. Carved on each bell were countless ant-like seal characters. The green light would flow and it was lovely. Each bell had a different effect. The one that had been struck was Great Clear Sound Incantation. Zhuo could only just be envious. This set of green jade bells had taken tremendous time and energy by Su Yi Shixiang to forge. The other Shixiang didn't have one either. Su Yu Shixiang was well loved by the outer sect disciple. Any other Shixiang who would use Great Clear Sound Incantation to help clear their minds. Su Yu's sleeve swept out and the doors of the Hall of Hearing Principles loudly closed. Zhuo's attention was on the desk in front of Shixiang. Other than that set of green jade bells, there were also a variety of knickknacks. Forging? Zhuo instantly rejoiced inside. He had entered Wukong Sword Sect for 2 years but never heard San Shixiang talk about forging. Every so often after an amount of time passed, San Shixiang would teach some of the methods of cultivation. It was one of the benefits for outer sect disciples. Many people entered the sect just in order to learn these cultivation methods so when they left the mountain sect, they could find a good job. Like Zhuo. He only had a cultivation of 7th level Lianqi. He couldn't find many jobs. But if his 3rd level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain, he could find a pretty good job in any farm or medicine garden. Tian Yujie didn't have many exports but due to the good climate and abundant Ling energy, there were many farms and medicine gardens. Scriptures increase Ling energy and cultivation. What was needed was the resources and accumulation. Ling veins, Ling medicine, Jingshi, they could all increase cultivation. If they were not available, then you could only rely on time to slowly accumulate. Spells were the usage of Ling energy. What was needed was teachings and comprehension. There were geniuses who could comprehend the arts on their own, but for normal people, receiving teachings was more realistic. Some large sects, before their disciples achieved Zhuji, they were restricted from learning arts. That was because the way they looked at it, cultivation was the most fundamental. But for normal Xiuzhe, cultivation was just a delusion. Ling veins, Ling medicine, Jingshi, etc. None of those were things they could wish for. In comparison, spells were more realistic. One could find a pretty good job, receive a pretty good income. Other than guaranteeing a livelihood, their descendants wouldn't find it as difficult for their cultivation. You have spent a certain amount of time at this sect. I know how much effort and hardship you have endured. You have to keep cultivating and not start to neglect it. It will make it easier to find a living in the future. Your efforts would not be wasted. Cultivation through scriptures, I won't be chatty. There isn't anything to talk about there. If your scores this year are excellent, I naturally will pass on high-level scriptures to you. Today, what I am going to be speaking of is 2 ways of forging talismans. The first is Ling Exciting Hoe. The second is Needle and Thread Sucking Pouch. The Ling Exciting Hoe is an essential talisman for you in order to take care of the Ling fields. It can excite the Ling energy inside the Ling fields and make it easier for the Ling plants to absorb Ling energy. The Needle and Thread Sucking Pouch is used to intake the sap of the Ling plants. Remember, you have to quickly hand over the sap of the Ling plants that are sucked out. Otherwise, when the Ling energy in the sap has dissipated, you can't get a single contribution point. Pay close attention. I'll only say all of this once today. Suyu Shixiang spoke plainly, spirit in his words that made convinced people. Zuo listened extremely carefully. This was the first time he touched the topic of forging. He was afraid to lose even one word. When Suyu Shixiang finished his lecture, it was 6 hours later. He hadn't ate all night, and concentrated for 6 hours. The front chest of Zuo was touching his back. Quickly returning to his yard, he searched around for something to fill his stomach. Before he could wipe his mouth, a sudden sword light came down from the sky, landing in the yard. The Jinji around the yard didn't have any strength to resist before exploding. A man with an icy expression appeared in front of Zuo. Zuo swallowed the swear that had reached his mouth right back into his stomach, his heart jumping wildly. Why did this death god come? Before he could make a bow, he heard the others snort, "You are Zuo?" Zuo greets Luo Li Shixiang. Zuo's voice was respectful as he made a deep bow. Luo Li Shixiang might be ranked 4th among the inner sect disciple, but he had the deepest cultivation among this generation of disciples. His natural personality was cold, and he was a fanatic about cultivation. His innate talents were outstanding, and among the 2nd generation, he was the only disciple that managed to achieve empty sword. He was the one widely accepted as the one most likely in 200 years to achieve the sect's greatest technique, Void Sword. Just as famous as his innate talents and power was his moody temper. He was responsible for supervising a mine for the sect. According to rumors, if the Xiu servants who mined there were even the least bit incompliant, he would kill them with one stroke. Luo Li was too lazy to talk to him. He suddenly appeared behind Zuo's back and lifted off, holding his collar. Zuo might have called himself the first one among the outer sect disciples to have a steed, but it was the first time he experienced such flying speed. He only felt the sky and earth were rotating, the oncoming wing making his face hurt, and he couldn't even open his eyes. When his feet touched the ground, Zuo almost collapsed. So it really is a zombie face? Zuo, who had just recovered from dizziness, heard this, and instantly his good opinion of the speaker was 0. A young female dressed in green examined him in interest. Her chin was pointy, her cheekbones slightly high. There was a smile on her face, but there wasn't any warmth in her eyes. Her gaze made Zuo very uncomfortable, but he didn't dare to show any discontent. He respectfully gave a bow. Greetings to Hao Shiji. Hao Min Shiji and Luo Li Shixiang were the disciples of Yan Lishishu. Supposedly, Luo Li Shixiang was weirdly infatuated with her. That rumor didn't seem to be unfounded. I heard your little art of cloud and rain is at the 3rd level? Hao Min pierced Zhuo with a look and asked. Yes. Very good. Hao Min said, satisfied, I'm going out for a time. In this time, the medicine fields will be given into your care. Not giving Zhuo any time to talk, she threw a jade pendant at Zhuo, coldly stating, this is the certificate to get into the medicine fields. Rain once a day. From today until I return, in this time, you have to take care of the medicine fields. Her tone instantly became severe. My temper isn't very good. We'll put the ugly words first. If something goes wrong with the medicine fields, I won't forgive you when I return. Finishing, she didn't look at Zhuo, turning to look at Luo Li. She wrapped around his arm, her smile like a flower, her voice gentle as water. Shi Xiang, let's go. A few hints of warmth floated on Luo Li's face. He looked carelessly at Zhuo, snorted coldly, and the two flew into the air. Zhuo held the jade pendant, frozen to the spot as he watched the two disappear into the sky. When a person is misfortunate, even drinking water would get stuck in the teeth. He had never thought he would be this misfortunate. The outer sect disciples didn't like Hao Min Shiji. She was ruthless and selfish. Being ordered about by her didn't have any benefits. Her temper was also nasty and as fickle as Luo Li Shixiang. If one didn't take care, it was beatings and scolding. From beginning to end, the two never even asked for his opinion. Zhuo screamed inside. From when he opened his eyes to now, he only interacted with the Ling grains. He had never taken care of medicine fields before. Even worse, with his cultivation he could only do the 3rd level of little art of cloud and rain once every day. Thinking about the rain agreements he had signed with the other Shixiang, his mouth was bitter. There were 3 places in Wukong Sword Sect for medicine fields. The one that Hao Min Shiji was responsible was in Cold Mist Valley. He held the jade pendant, his heart jumping as he walked in the direction of Cold Mist Valley. Cold Mist Valley was between 2 mountain peaks, mist swirling about all year around. The temperature was lower than anywhere else on Wukong Mountain, and that was how it got its name. It was one of the important areas of the sect. Outer sect disciples basically had no permission to enter. If it wasn't that Zhuo's little art of rain and cloud had reached the 3rd level, Hao Min definitely wouldn't have picked him. On the road, there were old trees, grass everywhere. Fragrance rose and vitality was present. Sometimes, small animals like rabbits and squirrels passed by, joyfully jumping. But Zhuo had no interest in admiring scenery. His heart beat frantically as he held the jade pendant and furtively made his way, 2 legs trembling. Everywhere on this road were Jinji. They were in the open or in the shadows. Some strong Jinji occasionally would discharge a terrifying aura which made him almost suffocate. With his 7th level Lianqi abilities, if he accidentally set off the Jinji, not a drop of him would remain. If it wasn't that he naturally had a zombie face, his face definitely would be pasty white and bloodless. 3rd elder student. Referring to Su Yi, who is ranked 3rd? Senior female student? Senior uncle. Male of a sex older generation. Chapter 5 Cold Mist Valley. Using the jade pendant in his hands, Zhuo safely reached the entrance to Cold Mist Valley. The entrance was shrouded in mist, a white piece of blankness. Zhuo hesitated for a while, not finding any other roads, and could only stride towards the white mist. When he entered the mist, the white mist seemed to have recognized him and automatically divided, revealing a small alley. His mind relaxed and let out a breath. He admired the techniques that the sect had. If one day he could do the same, it would be so refreshing. His thoughts couldn't help but wander away. Following the alley in the mist, after walking half a mile, his perceptions suddenly widened. About 5 mu of the valley were filled with all kinds of Ling medicine. Their colors varied and their shapes were strange. Looking out, it was as though a colorful carpet had been laid out on the valley floor. Several dozens of rainbow sparrow-tailed butterflies flew around. Black-banded yellow honeybees formed troops and flew to and fro. At the very bottom of the valley, a silver waterfall flew down from the cliff, roaring like thunder. With great power, It loudly smashed into a deep pond, making countless water drops. The moisture and the fragrance of all kinds of ling herbs mixed together. Taking a deep breath, Zhuo felt unspeakably comfortable. He suddenly felt that taking care of the ling fields wasn't as bad as he thought. Remembering that Hao Min warned to make rain once every day, Zhuo hurriedly started to pinch and activate the spell. The moisture condensed from all around, visible to the naked eye, and gradually formed a ball of cloud, floating above the medicine fields. The spell on Zhuo's hands rapidly changed, and after a series of dazzling movements, the cloud started to rain and a fine drizzle flowed into the medicine fields. This little storm lasted for an hour before the cloud dissipated. Zhuo gave a breath of relief. It was very wet here and made it much easier to do little art of cloud and rain. He couldn't help but start to calculate. The situation was better than he had hoped for. If he toiled hard enough, he could barely finish what had been set out in the contracts. What he had to pray for was that nothing would happen to the medicine fields and remain safe and compete until Hao Min Shiji came back. Nothing could be solved by him. If he had any fantasies before, he understood the cruel reality now. He was very sensitive to the density of ling energy. The ling energy of Cold Mist Valley was very plentiful. To have plowed medicine fields in such a good spot, the grade of the ling herbs that were planted definitely wouldn't be low. If something really happened on his watch, he shuddered. Even though the path was layered in Jinji, there weren't any in the valley. Zhuo went around the entire valley. The pond was so deep the bottom couldn't be seen. The cold of the water pierced straight into the bones. The sound of the waterfall was very loud, echoing around the entire valley. He crouched in the ling fields, inspecting the ling herbs one by one. He needed to remember the characteristics of each ling herb by heart. He had only grown ling grain before and had no knowledge of ling herbs, so he could only use this brute method. Right now, he didn't hope for receiving any rewards, and only hoped that nothing would go wrong. Any ling herb here, if he sold himself, it wasn't still enough to repay it. He could guarantee he had never focused so hard before. It was only when the sky was turning dark that he dragged his exhausted body back to the yard. When he saw the mess surrounding the yard, the Jinji that had been ripped to shreds, he wanted to cry. At this time, he didn't have the energy to construct the Jinji again. He was so tired he wanted to die. He didn't have the strength to even raise his eyelids. Returning to the seclusion room, he only managed to add a drop of ling energy into the sound tablet before dropping down on the mat and falling asleep. He woke up in the sound of the sound tablet's broadcast. The 23rd Sword Test Conference has finished its qualification rounds. Up until now, 4,253 sword shio have received qualifications for the competition. This year's Sword Test Conference has plenty of rewards. The top 100 will receive a 4th grade flying sword. The top 10 will receive a 5th grade flying sword. The prize for the winner has been confirmed as Arrow Point, 7th grade. According to those familiar, this is the highest grade of flying sword that has been seen in the history of the Sword Test Conference. This has caused the interest of many major sect disciples, including those from Wushuang Sword Sect, Su'a Luo Sword Sect. Good thing, good thing. One I want. No chance, no change. Zhuo carelessly climbed up from the mat, humming a strange tune. Walking out of the seclusion room, he started to construct the Jinji. As to the walls, he could only wait for another time to build them. He could see broken bricks everywhere and had to clean the surroundings. Otherwise, he didn't even have space to set up the Jinji. With his 7th level Yanqi Sil, there were many restrictions for him to set up a Jinji. Humming a small tune, he cleaned up the broken and ruined walls. This yard had been built long ago and the walls were already in ruins. Now it was completely destroyed by Luo Li Shixiang. Thinking about the strong and imposing manner of Luo Li Shixiang as he landed from the sky, Zhuo felt his heart palpitate even now. Zhuo suddenly stopped walking and bent down to pick up something. It was a little pink paper crane, much smaller than Zhuo's yellow paper crane, and very well made. This was Little Thousand Crane, used for passing letters and speech. But this was a plaything. Its speed wasn't as fast as letters using flying swords, especially for long distances. Using it wasn't very convenient, so most of the users were Xiozha that were lower than Jindan. How did it run over to his place? Zuo rudely unfolded the pink little thousand crane and suddenly understood. It was a wishing little thousand crane. Very long ago, when the Xiozha started to break through the void and search for new Jie, they frequently would encounter dangers and get trapped. After the trapped Xiozha found that they couldn't break free, they would write their wishes and plea for help on the little thousand crane and let it fly free. Since there weren't any imprints, no one knew where the little thousand cranes would fly. But the life of a Xiozha was long. If they were lucky, they could still make it for a long period of time. After the first time a rescue occurred due to a wishing little thousand crane, the wishing little thousand crane became fashionable in the Xiozha world. As time progressed, this became a game for female Xiozha to expel their feelings. They would write their emotions on the wishing little paper cranes and send them out. However, they would put an impression on it so the one who picked it up could send the wishing little thousand crane back to their hands based on the imprint. What made a young girl's heart beat faster than some fate that couldn't be calculated and was too wonderful for words? Zuo couldn't understand it. In his heart, there were only Jingshi, Ling grains, cultivation. Romance, this kind of luxury, he didn't have any of it. Unfolding the little thousand crane, it reveals a few rows of beautiful writing. Hoping so much to carry a bag, go out alone to roam at a place where there was no one else, sing soak in the sun, sentimental nonsense. Zuo snorted coldly inside and gave the criticism he thought most accurate. It was such a pity. Wasting such good paper. He didn't know what paper it was made out of, but looking at the quality, it wouldn't be lower than third grade. To use third grade paper to make a little thousand crane. It was a waste that raised people's hackles. Once the paper was used, it couldn't be used again. Such a pity, Zuo thought. He was preparing to crumple the pink paper into a ball when he suddenly stopped. Expressionlessly, he tilted his head. Thinking, he started to run into his room. Rushing into the room, he looked around and found what he wanted. Fresh and thick cinnabar and a weasel bristle brush. Taking up the brush, dipping deep into the cinnabar, his wrist flowing as he wrote out a word. Dumbass. Looking at the bright red that took almost all of the pink paper, Zuo roared with laughter, extremely smug. His life was nerve-wracking and full. It was extremely hard and he didn't have any time to be depressed. He knew very well the difficulty in life. All around him, everyone was putting their lives on the line in order to survive, for their families, for their descendants. Like Old Black. Even if it was hard and exhausting, but he didn't dislike this kind of life. He felt the opposite. This was life. Sentimental nonsense. Only people who had idle lives and no ambitions would have that. Zuo looked down on those people. In a cheerful mood, he hummed a tune as he folded the paper again into a little thousand crane. Who's a dumbass? Who's a dumbass? You're a dumbass. You're a dumbass. The imprint of the owner was on the little thousand crane. After Zuo put Ling energy into it, he threw it up in the air. The pink little thousand crane flapped its tiny wings and disappeared into the sky. Zuo's mood became exceptionally well. He exuberantly cleaned the yard, his steps lighter than usual. When the Jinji were finished, it was past noon. He grabbed something to eat before going back to the seclusion room to meditate. Normal outer sect disciples rarely would spend such a long time on meditation. Compared to learning the arts, meditation and increasing cultivation wasn't profitable. However, Zuo persisted in spending 4 hours each day on meditation. After he found the Ling vein in the seclusion room, he spent even more time each day in mediation. The cultivation was the foundation. That was a rationale all Xiozha understood. He had the benefit of the Ling vein. Even though what he cultivated with was the most normal scripture, but the results were still outstanding. Just how rigid the ranks were in the cultivation world, he had a very deep impression. If he could achieve Zhuji, even if he was an outer sect disciple, Hao Min and Luo Li wouldn't dare to treat him so. Zhuji was a division line. It would directly decide the quality of your life. To receive a beautiful life, the only way was to continuously increase your own power. His mediation, once he sat down, was 6 hours. When he opened his eyes again, his eyes were filled with joy. Lianqi 8 level. Persisting in cultivating and doing the scripture, The payback finally came. He made it to the 8th level. The cultivation of 8th level Yangqi, in all of the outer sect disciple of the entire Wukong sword sect, it definitely could enter the top 3. He spread out his fingers and started to apply a spell. A layer of aged gold energy appeared around his finger. Once his cultivation increased a level, it was much easier to do a spell. A super excited Zhuemo started to do Little Art of Cloud and Rain. Once he started, he instantly felt the difference. The speed at which the moisture condensed was much faster. The raindrops poured down like they wouldn't stop. Some new experiences he took time to savor. Suddenly remembering the medicine fields, he woke up and climbed up, rushing out of his yard. Running to Cold Mist Valley in one go, not taking the time to recover, he started to release Little Art of Cloud and Rain. Only when everything had been rained on did the stone in his heart land on the ground. Chapter 6 Highly Dangerous Shixiang has come. Fei Yun enthusiastically gave a greeting. He was wearing the light yellow robes of all the disciples of the Everything Pavilion. It was just the front had been rolled up and tucked at the waist. Zhuemo's voice was friendly. "You're on duty today? Shixiang has to look after me." Fei Yun chuckled. He was clear. This zombie face was a large account among all the outer sect disciples. Most of his sales came from this person. Wukong sword sect was far from Dongfu and it was exceedingly troublesome to make a round. The Everything Pavilion had been set up to ease the way for everyone. There wasn't much high-level inventory sold at the Everything Pavilion, but for outer sect disciples, it could basically fulfill their needs. Even if the prices were slightly higher than Dongfu, but it was much more convenient and everyone became used to buying what they needed here. Even for Zhuemo, who had a flying paper crane, it was troublesome to go to Dongfu. The two were familiar and he wasn't courteous. "Anything good lately?" "There's a few first-grade talismans, but I'm afraid it isn't what Shixiang wishes for." Fei Yun smiled as he answered. Upon familiarity, he had experienced Zhuemo's shrewdness. He rarely would buy something that he didn't need. "I'll take a look." Zhuemo didn't refuse. Fei Yun took out some talismans. Zhuemo flipped through them one by one. A bangle color orange, carved from an entire piece of fire jade, could increase the ability of the use to control flames. Zhuemo put it to one side. This bangle was useful for those who made medicine. He didn't need it. And the price of 10 pieces of second-grade jingsher was too expensive and not useful enough. The following few items he put them down as well. Only a yellow copper ring. He examined for a long time. Shixiang is interested in this ring. Fei Yun saw hope and started to urge. Golden sword ring, first-grade gold element talisman. Only need to input gold ling energy until it is full and then it can release 3 sword strikes. The power is astounding and overwhelmingly strong. The important part is, the price is great. Just 5 pieces of second-grade jingsher. A talisman, 5 pieces of second-grade jingsher, there's no other place. Fei Yun ran on, hyping the golden sword ring. Zhuemo didn't speak. He adjusted his energy and diverted ling energy towards the ring. If it was like before, he couldn't use the ring. But now, he learned aged gold energy, and could turn his ling energy into gold ling energy so he could use the ring. Fei Yun saw an inkling and quickly closed his mouth to avoid distracting Zhuemo. The ling energy continued to pour into the ring. The dark yellow copper ring started to glow. Zhuemo was shocked. No wonder it was a talisman. The majority of the ling energy in his body had been given and it barely managed to fill 1/3 of the ring. His mind moved and he fused together his fingers, pointing at the ground. What? A gold-colored sword strike came out, hitting the stone ground. Crack! Fragments of stone sprayed and an extremely thin and deep hole was left in the stone. The sword strike was so penetrating. Xiuzhe under Zhuji would have difficulty blocking it. The power behind this talisman was enough. The only flaw was that it could only store 3 sword strikes. But thinking about it, if it didn't have this flaw, would the talisman be the price it was now? Fei Yun came over. How does Shixiang feel? Zhuemo was satisfied inside but nothing showed on his face. I'll buy it. Fei Yun cheered. Shixiang has good eyes. Zhuemo handed over a list filled with materials. Do you have these? Fei Yun took the list and scanned. He said, shocked. Xixiang wants to make a Ling exciting hoe? Why waste the effort? I have a pretty good quality product. If Xixiang wants it, I'll give Xixiang a realistic price. I want to make one. It's a kind of comprehension. Zuorimo replied. Fei Yun paused and then said solemnly, Xixiang's words are reasonable. This one is in awe. I have all of these materials. Xixiang, just wait for a moment. Coming out of the everything pavilion, Zuorimo had spent most of his jingshe. Buying the golden sword ring wasn't an impulse out of the blue. When he had achieved the 8th level of Lianqi last night, he had decided to buy a defensive talisman. 2 years from Lianqi level 3 to level 8. Such speed it would astound people. Based on what he saw, he had pretty good talent but not to such a terrifying degree. The biggest credit should be that section of Ling vein. His cultivation of Lianqi level 8 couldn't be concealed from others. If it landed in the eyes of those with ideas, all kinds of conclusions would form. But the thing about the Ling vein was that it couldn't become public. The common saying was right. Easy to avoid the daylight robbery, hard to defend against the arrows from the dark shadows. Not afraid of a thief stealing, afraid of a thief thinking. If the news that he achieved level 8 of Lianqi, there would be many that would be thinking about him. He resolved to decrease the time he spent out in the following days. He would stay home and ponder the jade stick. He had just started on Art of Aged Gold. Not even saying the 3rd level, he was still very far from the 2nd level. But he also knew that paper couldn't enclose a flame for long. He couldn't hide the fact that he achieved level 8 Lianqi for long. This golden sword ring was to prevent accidents from occurring. He had never seen an incident of kill and rob for treasure, but he had heard of many. Carefulness wasn't a bad thing. Forging Ling exciting hoe was one of his ideas from long ago. When he had just known that there was a thing called forging, he was filled with interest for this strange art. But he had never had the chance. Just a while ago when Suyu Xixiang taught them how to make Ling exciting hoe and 1,000 threads and needles pouch, now he could try to start forging. He brought the materials needed, but he didn't start forging immediately. He just broke into the 8th level and his status wasn't stable. Another way of saying it was that he wasn't familiar with the present Ling energy he had now. He put the majority of the time on Art of Aged Gold. Other than going to the medicine fields once a day, he basically stayed home the entire time. When he made rain for others, he didn't put his all in. Just like before, he would show an exhausted appearance after each time. After a few days, no one had managed to find that he reached the 8th level of Lianqi. Zuomo's heart finally landed. Sometimes he would think, were his fears groundless? But out of prudence, he would spend some time each day using golden sword ring, and would always make sure that the Ling energy in the ring was full. Thankfully everything was calm and no accidents happened. He squatted in the Ling fields of the yard, his right hand on a stalk of Ling grain, his eyes closed. The faint gold of aged gold energy quietly slipped into the Ling grain. He could feel the aged gold energy effortlessly traveling through the body of the Ling grain. Suddenly, a series of fluctuations came from the aged gold energy. Zuomo's mind roused. He found his goal. It was a crowd of aphids. The calm, aged gold energy was like a shark that smelled blood, furiously rushing at the goal. Through the information that the aged gold energy passed along, Zuomo could clearly feel the tyrannical state of the aphids and the intense rejection it had towards the aged gold energy. Consciousness to consciousness. Zuomo, who had never been attacked, lost control of the aged gold energy. Forcing himself to calm down, he didn't retreat from the furious and tyrannical consciousness of the aphids. A cold light flashed through his eyes. He pressed the aged gold energy. Already roaring to go, the aged gold energy leapt towards the aphids. Aged gold energy was like numerous grains of tiny sand. They surrounded the aphids and continuously left tiny wounds on the aphids. These half-clear aphids might be hard to distinguish with the naked eye, their consciousness also extremely small, but they could merge the consciousness of every aphid together to form a mind thousands of times larger than their single minds. Their spirits were filled with brutality, destruction, and ruin. Other than that, they kept on secreting a colloidal solution to heal their wounded body. This was a great and fierce battle. Zwarimo hadn't thought a trial run of aged gold energy would turn out like this. He completely forgot this was a normal trial run. His mind was immersed in this battle, immersed in that lump of aged gold energy. He put all his effort to sustain the aged gold energy and ran again and again at the aphids. No one else would be like him, putting their consciousness on the aged gold energy. It was just too dangerous. He had never been in battle. His consciousness was extremely fragile. Just one slip, it was easy for his consciousness to be scattered by an even stronger consciousness. Any other person might become insane from doing so. But the brutal consciousness from the merging of the aphids didn't overcome Zwarimo's consciousness but aroused the viciousness in Zwarimo's bones. He was like a provoked lion, crazily leaping at the enemy. In the natural world, the weaker were afraid of the stronger. When Zwarimo's consciousness became even more crazy and fierce, the aphids with their low intelligence instinctively felt fear. The battle which had been deadlocked quickly leaned toward Zwarimo. The aged gold energy continued to tear. One by one, the aphids were torn to shreds. Everywhere it passed, it would only leave behind a heap of the powder of the aphids. It was actually very strange. The aged gold energy that was extremely damaging to the aphids were gentle and harmless to the ling grains. When the very last aphid was killed, Zwarimo finally came out of the desperate killing. It was like he had been taken out of the water. His entire body was soaked in sweat. He panted heavily, his eyes like a wild animal, glaring viciously. After another while, the viciousness in his eyes finally left. He couldn't carry on and sat down on the ground. At this time, he felt the fear come on. No wonder there aren't many ling plant farmers. If they aren't careful, they would die easily. As he panted, Zwarimo patted his chest. Before, he had assumed that farming was a safe profession. But he didn't think it would be so dangerous. He didn't have any energy left, so he sat in the ling fields before he struggled up and moved to the seclusion room. He needed to replenish ling energy. All the ling energy in his body had been completely wrung out, not a drop remaining. He didn't know if it was that he was exhausted, but he very quickly entered a meditative state. Chapter 7. Ye'll wait for you. Waking up from his meditation, Zwarimo's soul and body were both refreshed, his entire body light and extremely comfortable. Coming out of the seclusion room, he took along the sound tablet and jumped onto the roof. Reaching out with his fingers, his mind moved and the light gold of aged gold energy appeared with no effort at all. Zwarimo was gleeful. He didn't need all that trouble for nothing. Clearly his control of aged gold energy had increased dramatically. The aged gold energy around his fingers suddenly twisted quickly and stopped. It shone like the stars, like specks of tiny gold sand, extremely pretty in the dark. An idea suddenly came into his head. Was aged gold energy actually an offensive spell? That minor yet exceptionally vicious fight made him conceive this idea. But from what he understood about ling plant farmers, they were the classical non-fighting profession. He had never heard of any ling plant farmer that was good at fighting. Also, he wasn't the only one in the sect that knew aged gold energy. Everyone had different talents. Zwarimo could learn the 3rd level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain. Naturally, there were people good at the other arts. In the outer sect disciples, there was a Shixiang who was on the 2nd level of aged gold energy. Not just aged gold energy, even the art of flora, art of earth energy, and art of crimson flame were practiced by other people. It was just they were not high level. Was he wrong? The question circled in his head and wouldn't disappear. But very quickly he didn't want to think about the question. He took up the sound tablet, added some ling energy and put it beside him. His head lying on his arms as he looked at the vast sky, his heart slowly calmed. The night wind blew gently, cold, unspeakably pleasant. Hearing the news that continuously streamed out of the sound tablet, Zwarimo peacefully fell asleep. The next day, he went to make rain for the medicine fields and made another contract to make rain for a Shixiang before going back to his own yard. Passing by the ling fields, looking at the neat rows of ling grains, he suddenly thought of his suspicion from last night. Hesitating for a second, he decided to try once. His hand touched a Ling grain, the aged gold energy, soundlessly permeating the stalk. Just like yesterday, Zhuomo's consciousness was connected to the aged gold energy. Very quickly, the aged gold energy found a patch of aphids. Zhuomo instantly became nervous. Due to the brutality of yesterday, he still felt trepidation. However, today's situation was out of his expectations. The aged gold energy didn't encounter any resistance. All the aphids were ground to dust in less than 15 minutes. The entire process was done in one go without any hindrance. Why was it like this? He was puzzled. He put his hand on another stalk of Ling grain. The same situation occurred. Was it that stalk of Ling grain yesterday was different? He shook his head. There were no differences between the two stalks today and the one yesterday. Where was it going wrong? He ran to the spot of the stalk of Ling grain from yesterday and checked again. There truly weren't any differences. However, he found that this stalk of Ling grain's growth was much better than yesterday, the leaves greener, and the powdered remains of the aphids had become their food. Based on his 2 years of farming experience, he estimated that the production of this stalk of Ling grain would definitely be greater than before. Zhuomo was gleeful. The question of whether aged gold energy should be considered offensive or not was thrown to one side. What was a benefit more realistic than increasing production? Ling grains were jinshe were talismans, spells. Zhuomo put 100% into the large task of clearing pests from the Ling fields. 5 mu of Ling fields, he wasn't going to let go of one stalk. 10 entire days. Other than going to the medicine fields and Ling fields to make rain, all the other time was spent on the Ling grains in his yard. He used aged gold energy on one stalk after the next. When he spent all his Ling energy, he ran to the seclusion room to recover and then came out and repeat. After a while, he was almost numb, mechanically using aged gold energy. After the last stalk of Ling grain was scanned by the aged gold energy, he looked at the organized Ling fields. The growth was amazing, the Ling grains were all green and plump. A strong feeling of accomplishment rose in his heart. He wasn't the only one who knew aged gold energy, but no one would be as crazy as him. To inspect the Ling grains one stalk by one, the amount of work was horrifying. They only would use aged gold energy whenever they found a sickness in the Ling grains. If there wasn't that section of Ling vein in the seclusion room, Zhuomo wouldn't dare to do it. 10 days of continuous toil. Whether body or mind, Zhuomo was extremely exhausted. He only wanted to do one thing now. That was going back to his room and getting a good sleep. Just as he prepared to start walking, a pink little thousand crane flew at him straight from far away, stopping right in front of him. Whoa! Zhuomo felt it seemed familiar. After thinking for a long time, he finally remembered that the wishing little thousand crane he had picked up 10 days ago when he was cleaning the yard was also pink. That wasn't right. A wishing little thousand crane couldn't localize. For a little thousand crane to find its target, it needed an imprint to guide it. Last time, the little thousand crane had its owner's imprint, so if Ling energy was put in, it would fly to its owner. But he didn't leave behind any imprint. Any kind of imprint would contain Ling energy. To avoid the other finding him, when Zhuomo wrote the words, he didn't dare to use any Ling energy at all. The first time it flew to him, that was luck. But if it can fly for a second time to him, that couldn't be explained by luck. Such a strange event. Examining the fine little thousand crane floating in front of him, he hesitated. But Zhuomo still reached out and took it. Holding the small crane, he went into the seclusion room. Sitting on the mat, he started to unfold this little thousand crane. Spreading out the pink paper, there were only 2 characters, still the same graceful writing of before. When the 2 words entered his vision, an unforeseen event occurred. A kind of icy cold energy surrounded Zhuomo. The sense of extreme danger made the hair on his entire body straighten. It was like a sharp flying sword was right at his throat. The chill from the blade easily pierced into the skin and quickly spread through his body. Damn it, he couldn't move. On the zombie face was a pair of terrified eyes. Zhuomo's entire body was frozen by this cold presence. He couldn't even move a finger. The other's retribution? Punishment? He didn't have time to think about all that. He was like a trapped beast, the only instinct left was to fight. He fought with his life, trying to take back control of his body. He pushed the Ling energy inside. No effect. His body wouldn't move. He froze in his spot. The icy energy continued to increase. It was like a ruthless beast, mercilessly nearing Zhuemo, opening its gaping maw. It seemed to be certain that Zhuemo didn't have the ability to resist. Zhuemo was like a strange candle wax figure. That expressionless face was so still it was funny. Only the eyes, the pair of eyes full of terror, full of helplessness, full of rage, that conflicted with his thin and weak body and still face. His efforts were to no avail. That icy energy that terrified him pushed him to desperate straits, and he didn't have any room to retreat. The unwillingness and wrath inside his heart suddenly lit up. Go to hell. Furiously casting aged gold energy, all of his Ling energy, along with all of his consciousness slammed at the icy presence. This was his only solution. His only experience that could be considered a battle was the first time he used aged gold energy on the Ling grain. He still remembered the brutal energy at the time, the rush it gave his consciousness. But that consciousness made from the merging of thousands of aphids were as weak as an infant compared to this icy energy. At this time, he was like a madman, raising a sickle and rushing at a fully armored enemy. Aged gold energy was like a ball of light gold mist. Once it appeared, it aroused the attack of the icy energy. Suddenly, Zhuemo seemed to see countless flying swords, with their bright tails and screaming as they flew at him. The sword strikes were bitingly cold, crisscrossing into a forest that he couldn't avoid. The clear pupils transformed into a roaring sea of flames. The edges of the eyes that had widened to the limits cracked, blood running down his face. On the stiff face, it drew out 2 bright marks. He didn't feel it. The Ling energy under his crazy revolutions started to spin out of control. He didn't stop and continued to speed up his revolutions. Under full power, the aged gold energy seemed to become especially crazy. It didn't retreat and leapt at that icy energy. If someone walked into Zhuemo's room at this time, they would see a strange sight. A faint gold ball of light twisting furiously as though there was something invisible relentlessly corroding it, and its size continued to decrease. The faint gold cloud turned even more furiously but closely protected Zhuemo. The battle became even hotter. The aged gold energy faced the icy energy that threw out the sword strikes and didn't retreat. Like facing the consciousness of the aphid, the aged gold energy made this energy as an extremely large consciousness from a gigantic aphid. Zhuemo had no attention left for the aged gold energy. There was only one though in his head. Faster, faster. The revolutions of Ling energy was already at a shocking step. He had never tried to make his Ling energy revolve so fast. He didn't dare. But at this time, Zhuemo, whose eyes were red from battle, only hated that the Ling energy couldn't move faster. He continued to speed up his revolutions. Zhuemo's head roared as though something had been broken. His consciousness suddenly became dizzy. The Ling energy stampeded like wild horses, completely free of control. The aged gold energy, which originally had been turning and twisting furiously, did so even more, like boiling water. The shape of the cloud was extremely unstable. If Xiozha of higher cultivation saw this scene, they would instantly pale. Loss of control of Ling energy, what would follow was the explosion of the body and death. Suddenly, a warm stream came from Zhuemo's heart and entered his channels. The violent Ling energy suddenly became more obedient than anything. The speed of revolution didn't decrease and increased. The strong shaking of the aged gold energy disappeared without a warning and calmed down. What would amaze others was that icy energy seemed to have detected the strangeness and retreated for the first time. The peaceful, aged gold energy ball once again changed. It quickly shrunk towards its core. The cold energy changed along with it. A faintly gold 7-segmented all shaped like a pagoda. A water blue crescent-shaped flying sword with a small bell hanging. Silently opposite each other. But in the blink of an eye, both started to move. One sword, turned to one gold and one blue stream of light and accurately hit together. Ping! A clear note like breaking glass. A scattered ball of light exploded in the air. It was like a firework, blue and gold mixing, extremely beautiful. An unknown amount of time later, Zhuemo dazedly opened his eyes. His entire body hurt, his skin seemed to have cracked. He couldn't help but groan. This groan made his dizzy mind wake up. He could move. That damned energy had disappeared. He first froze and then a kind of unnameable carefreeness formed. He wanted to laugh, but before his mouth could move, the muscles pulled at the wound, and it turned into a screech. Even though he didn't know what had just happened, but without a doubt he won. He was still holding the pink paper in his hand. On it were written 2 words. Bad person. The writing was still graceful and the tone of speech meant the writer wasn't very grown, but Zhuemo, who was on his last gasps, couldn't help but feel disgust. Such a vicious woman. She wanted his life. The other must have put a spiritual attack on the words. To use the words to release such a terrifying attack, it wasn't someone he could face. Zhuemo was very clear about that. The head of the sect and the other elders, he didn't know if they could do it. But among the inner sect disciples, there definitely wasn't anyone who could reach such power. That mean, the vicious woman's power surpassed his sect's Shixiang. But walking once around death's door, he wasn't that scared, not even if the other's strength surpassed him greatly. He had heard that some strong Xiuzhe was arrogant and indifferent to low-level Xiuzhe, but had never thought the other would desire to kill because of a word. Gu was naive. Zhuemo took a deep breath. The wound that was pulled was extremely painful. He struggled up and bared his teeth as he moved to the desk. It was still the bright and thick cinnabar, still the same weasel bristle brush. Zhuemo dabbed viciously a few times. His entire right hand seemed to have been broken into quite a few pieces. Just the pain from a slight movement ached into the bones. He gritted his teeth and moved the brush. A few drops of red cinnabar dripped from the brush and landed on the pink paper, looking like blood. Due to pain, Zhuemo unconsciously sucked in breaths. His right hand holding the brush, he gravely left 4 crooked words on the pink paper. "Ye'll wait for you." Throwing the brush in his hand away, he took a few looks and then gave a strange laugh. His right hand didn't move according to his wishes, so it took an hour before he managed to fold the pink paper into a paper crane. It was a pity. The writing this time wasn't as good-looking as last time. Zhuemo was slightly regretful. As he jerked in breaths, he put the last bit of Ling energy in his body into the paper crane. Watching as the pink little thousand crane disappeared into the horizon, he cursed the vicious woman countless times inside. When he finished all this, he couldn't persevere any longer. Dried up, his eyes became black and like a block of wood, he dropped to the ground and fainted. Chapter 8 Changes thin and pale jade-like hands gently pinched a pink paper. Ah, so he did pay. No wonder he's in such a bad temper. I just wanted to scare you. Who told you to be a smart aleck and try to resist? The oval face was as smooth as resin, azure eyes like a sapphire held a hint of mischief. A high nose, a small red mouth. Silvery white top and shorts made from silver moon wool. It made her look furry and cute. A daringly exposed stomach and legs were full of youth. It was like the most perfect work from a master of ivory. There were no flaws. A bright red string tied up her hair, adding a hint of allure. There were a pair of sky blue bracelets on her wrist, many bells tied to them. When she moved, it would leave behind a stream of clear bell rings. But really such an interesting person? A person you find interesting, then they must be really interesting. Behind her came a respectful voice. A Xiuzhe, skin bronze, a sandalwood coronet on his head, looking about 40 years old. If anyone saw this person, they would be shocked. The famous Qi Zhenren would be so respectful to a little girl. She already knew that someone had come behind her and wasn't shocked. She giggled. Yes, such an interesting person. Cannot be over Zhuji middle level in cultivation, but could make it through Siener, Heart Demon Curse, at 20% power. Very strong. Oh. Qi Zhenren's face changed, really full of potential. He then muttered, "How about taking him into the sect?" Siener turned her face towards the window, her eyes deep and distant. On the road of cultivation, other than innate talent, chance is even more important. Of the disciples in the sect, there's thousands who have innate talent. Not saying the absolute power, but coming Jindan, how many people are there? She suddenly stuck out her tongue, naughtily stating, rather than that, he should be left to relieve Xiener's boredom. Qi Zhenren chuckled, and with a few hints of indulgence, whatever you want. Since you are so interested in him, why don't we stay a few days longer here? Xiener tilted her head, her blue eyes blinking. She mused and then shook her hand. The task is important. We've stayed here long enough. Ha, Xiener left an imprint on his body. He can't escape Xiener palm. Qi Zhenren saw Xiener's adorable manner and couldn't help roaring in laughter. Zuo slowly woke up, his body sore. He couldn't help but groan. Thinking about yesterday, it was like he just had a dream. But the wounds on his entire body constantly reminded him that that furious battle wasn't a dream. Even now, he couldn't quite believe it, that he defeated that icy energy. He knew there was a length of time when he was dizzy. And it was at that time that he won. But what happened at that time? He had no idea. After searching his mind and thinking for a while, he didn't have any idea and threw the question aside. As to whether the other will take revenge, Zuo was too lazy to think about it. Gu is very busy. He counted it out on his fingers and knew that he had many things to do today. Not just making rain for the medicine fields, he still had to make rain for one of the Shixiang. That was a complete 100 mu of Ling fields. The Ling herbs in the medicine fields, he didn't need to care how good their state was. But that 100 mu that he had to make rain for, that was a contract signed long ago, and he couldn't get out of it. Gritting his teeth and climbing up, Zuo felt that his skeleton would fall apart anytime. At turtle speed, he moved to Cold Mist Valley. Looking at the medicine felts over the valley, he cursed the adulterous couple of Hao Min and Luo Li countless times. Cursing was cursing, but he still had to do it. Just like normal, he started Little Art of Cloud and Rain, but the following events made Zuo dumbstruck. The white mist crazily flowed towards him. In the blink of an eye, it formed into a ball of clouds. Before the dazed Zuo could react, the cloud quickly expanded and in a short amount of time, completely smothered the entire valley. In the middle of the white could, Zuo dazedly reached out. Stands of cold flew through his hands. It was like a dream. He suddenly shook and woke up. This definitely wasn't the third level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain. His expression became serious. What had happened? He suddenly had a suspicion that the icy energy yesterday had seemed to change many things. He calmed his mind, closed his eyes, and spread out his arms in the middle of the cloud. Very quickly, he detected the peculiarity. The cloud ball made of countless streams of moisture was exceptionally lively. They were like a crowd of little creatures that had been woken up. The cloud this time had an additional and special energy. It was like the green grass that just sprouted, but also like sunlight. Zuo found it difficult to describe. He liked this energy very much because it was very comfortable. He couldn't help but cheer up. He had planted Ling grain for 2 years. Even though he didn't know what this lively energy was, but it definitely would be helpful for the growth of the Ling grains. His mind moved and the clouds started to rain. Among the raindrops that were like silver threads, the lively energy contained was even thicker than the moisture in the cloud. He didn't know if it was just his delusion, but he saw some of the leaves of Ling herbs spread out as though they were very happy. Delusion? Everything that happened yesterday seemed like a dream. What was happening today was even more like a dream. Was this the 4th level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain? He wasn't sure. The jade stick he had brought about, Little Art of Cloud and Rain, only described the 3rd level. It had many parts that he had never thought about. He admired the disciples of the larger sections. No matter what spell, after it reached a certain level, it required self-comprehension. But if they could learn from the experiences of those people before them, it would greatly decrease the side roads that they had to take. He had no one to ask. Not just the head and all the elders, but even the inner sect Shixiang, it wasn't easy to ask them to help. And he was very suspicious that there weren't any Shixiang in the inner sect that would put energy and time on the kind of low-level, non-combat art like Little Art of Cloud and Rain. Wukong Sword Sect was a sect that cultivated the sword. It was primarily made of sword shio. If it wasn't that they needed Ling grains, they wouldn't accept outer sect disciples like him. In all the Xiozha, sword Xiu were renowned for their attack power. They only cultivated sword scriptures. What they paid attention to was one sword defeats everything. The 5 elements naturally made up their own system. It was hard to learn them well. Most of the people who cultivated it were roaming Xiu. So among the roaming Xiu, there were the most Ling plant farmers. After making rain, he went to the Shixiang who he agreed early on to make rain. After making 2 rainstorms, Zhua Mo, who was seriously injured, wavered, frightening that Shixiang to rush him back to rest. After finishing all he needed for the day, Zhua Mo, tired in mind and body, still persisted in mediation after returning to the yard. The bitter experience yesterday made him deeply understand a reality. In the eyes of the strong Xiozha, low-level Xiozha were like grass. He didn't know if it was that his body needed recovery, but the time in mediation was 2 times what it usually was. His body was like a starving animal, furiously sucking up the Ling energy in the surroundings. The little section of Ling vein under the mat played a crucial role, continuously providing Ling energy. The Ling energy that Zhua Mo absorbed wasn't stored in his channels like usual but permeated everywhere into his body. It had to be said here that Zhua Mo's innate talents were very exceptional. 10 principle scripture wasn't a high-level scripture. But he deeply knew the importance of calm and right, so the effect of his cultivation was pretty good. After revolving 6 circuits, Zhua Mo achieved the record of the most circuits in one sitting from when he started. When he came out of mediation, he found in amazement the wounds on his body had recovered greatly. He inspected his cultivation. It did increase but not too greatly. It still steadily stayed at the 8th level of Lianqi. For some reason he wasn't disappointed but took a sigh of relief. If something was strange, then it would be considered the devil at work. There were too many strange things these 2 days. It seriously taxed his psychological state. Thinking about yesterday, his mind moved and he released Art of Aged Gold. And then it was the devil. The aged gold energy happily revolved around his finger, like a golden sand twister, flashing in front of his eyes. The faint gold of the energy was now a true gold, carrying the special luster that belonged to the metal gold. The gold light flashed entrancingly. Numerous information poured into his head. He had never thought of it. It was information he had never met. But as the aged gold energy turned around his fingers, the information completed itself in his mind. Art of Aged Gold was truly a kind of offensive art. If Zhua Mo only hypothesized it before, he was extremely certain now. The specialty of Art of Aged Gold revealed itself at the 2nd level. Through the jade stick, he was certain that he achieved the 2nd level of Art of Aged Gold. In one night, little Art of Cloud and Rain went to the 4th level. Art of Aged Gold increased to the 2nd level and made him, a daring person, feel his heart beat frantically. He felt it wasn't steady. The increase in power seemed to be an illusion, but the high it came with was real. However, he didn't hope for it to happen again. Even if he was very stubborn and left behind the words yesterday. Safety first. After his body recovered, his life quickly recovered. The evil pink little thousand crane didn't appear again. Zhua Mo was very comforted. On the table, there were all types of material, the dark red of the flame metal, an ingot of bronze, about 7 foot of pine wood. This was the complete set of materials he had brought from Fei Yun to forge, Ling exciting ho. Forging was one of the major categories that every Zui's had to learn. Everyone would know a little bit. It was the class that was most welcomed by the outer sect disciples. For outer sect disciples, a Xiozha that was good at forging could easily find a steady job. But for inner sect disciples, especially sword sects, there were only a few that were good at forging. Sword Xiu habitually used their sword to conquer the world, to use the sword to receive what they wanted or needed. Like his sect, there was only the line of Master Xan Yan who was talented in forging. Su Yi Shixiang was Xan Yan's best disciple. But for Master Xan Yan among his generation, or Su Yi Shixiang in the 2nd generation, their status wasn't very high. But that didn't have anything to do with Zhua Mo. At this time, he was excited. The first forging of his life was going to begin. Chapter 9 Forging Su Yi Shixiang had gone to great detail. The Ling Exciting Ho was the simplest of all talismans. Calling it a talisman was a bit of an overestimation. It couldn't even enter the first grade. But for Zue Mo, who had no experience in forging, there were still endless problems. For example, the copper ingot had to be beaten into a Ho shape. This was a great test of Zue Mo's abilities. Thankfully, the copper was soft, and after repeated banging for 4 hours, he managed to form a Ho blade. After that was carving formations on the copper hose. The formation for the Ling Exciting Ho was very simple. The thunder of the 8 basic formations. For any Zui's, it wouldn't be unfamiliar. He wasn't unfamiliar with the formation, but there were concerns about how to carve it. Zue Mo held a carving knife in his right hand as he cautiously carved out thunder. He had never used a carving knife before and frequently made mistakes. Once a mistake was made, it required erasing everything and starting from the beginning. After redoing it 7 or 8 times, Zue Mo finally managed to finish carving the formation. Looking at the formations carved on the surface of the copper Ho, Zue Mo's heart was filled with a sense of achievement. His cultivation was too low right now, so he could only use a carving knife, the most basic tool. If his cultivation was higher, and he could use his heart fire to forge, shaping would occur according to his thoughts. Similarly, due to his low cultivation, the simplest formation filled the entire Ho. If he had higher cultivation, he could manipulate a flying sword and carve layers of Jinji, destroy the heavens and become omnipotent. But for Zue Mo, right now was his limit. Face full of pain, he took out a second-grade Jinshi and inlaid it in the center of the formation. The copper Ho suddenly lit up, a light like a wave rippling through the body of the Ho. The scarred Ho suddenly became as smooth as in the beginning. By now, Zue Mo finally took a breath of relief. This Ling Exciting Ho was half completed. At this step, it was still successful. The copper Ho was too soft and easily changed shape, destroying the structure of the formation. So right after would be using fire metal or to reinforce the structure and increase hardness. Holding the crimson fire metal or on his hand, he could clearly feel the warmth that spread out from it. Putting the fire metal or on the copper Ho, Zue Mo thought back to the forging methods that Su Yi Shixiang had taught. The crux of this step was to turn the fire metal or to liquid to dissolve in the copper Ho. If there was heart fire, it would be extremely easy to finish the step, but for Zue Mo, he had to borrow a few special spells. The Ling energy in Zue Mo's body revolved, his hands moving like flowers blooming. The Ling energy changed as it followed the path of his fingers, his hands enveloped in a layer of red light. Go! The 2 hands flipped and the red light left, hitting the copper Ho and the fire metal ore. The fire metal ore became entirely red, the crimson liquid metal pouring onto the copper Ho. The copper Ho was like a sponge. When the liquid metal touched it, it was absorbed, not a drop left. The color of the copper Ho quietly changed, a few hints of dark red among the copper Ho. He took up the Ho blade. The Ho was heavier than before. He reached with a finger to gently tap. The sound was clear. He could clearly feel the quality had moved up a few levels and was exceptionally strong. Taking the prepared pine wood stick and sticking it into the Ho, this Ling Exciting Ho was complete. Joyfully, Zue Mo immediately rushed into the Ling fields in the yard to try out the power of this Ling Exciting Ho. After digging down, the Ho shuddered slightly. From the head came a strong feeling of vibration. Zue Mo bent down to inspect the field, a happy expression on his face. The Ling Exciting Ho was definitely an essential talisman for farming. The Ling energy where the Ho had just been was clearly different from the surroundings. The Ling energy in the surroundings were unequally distributed, in tangles or blocks. And on the piece of dirt he had just hoed, the Ling energy had all been broken up and scattered equally around. Like this kind of free Ling energy, the Ling grains found it easiest to absorb. Good thing. Zue Mo instantly became motivated and the Ho flew. In one session he hoed all of the 5 mu of Ling fields in the yard. He held the Ling Exciting Ho, breathing like a bull, his face pale. Because he had been too excited, he forgot that the weight of this Ling Exciting Ho wasn't light. With his little body, it took a lot of strength. But even half dead, he still couldn't disguise the glee in his heart. To successfully make a talisman on the first try, it was hard to describe the kind of exhilaration. 5 mu of Ling fields. He used Art of Aged Gold to kill pests, used the 4th level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain to water, and used Ling Exciting Ho to loosen the soil. In this entire sect, no one had taken so much care with the Ling grains. He was very curious how much the harvest of these 5 mu of Ling fields would increase this year. With his cultivation of Lianqi 8th level, he was at ease controlling the Ling energy. If the production of these 5 mu increased a lot, he could use this fine and attentive methods to raise the 50 mu of Ling fields that he had rented from the sect. Then he would jump to become the wealthiest among all the outer sect disciples. This made his heart beat. Nothing was more real than Ling grains and Jingshi. Successing at forging on his first try, it gave Zhuo Mo great encouragement. The unluckiness of the past while seemed to sweep away. He started to familiarize himself with the other 3 arts, especially Art of Flora. The uses of the 3 arts were completely different. Art of Crimson Flame was used to activate seeds, to speed up germination. Other than that, it concentrated the essence of the sun and was most suitable for yang-type Ling plants. Art of Earth Energy could concentrate the energy of the earth and was especially suitable for the growth of some yin-type Ling plants. And Art of Flora and Little Art of Cloud and Rain were similar, not yin or yang. But Art of Flora was more dominating than Little Art of Cloud and Rain. It extracted the essence of plants to nourish the growth of the Ling grains. The basic quality of Art of Flora was robbery. Robbing the essence of other plants to nourish itself. He had to be extremely careful when using it. Even though Wukong Mountain was covered in trees, but if he wasn't careful, it was easy for one of the old trees to wither. Every time he used Art of Flora, Zhuo Mo was alert and cautious, afraid of ruining the ancient trees in the mountains. It wasn't easy for ancient trees to grow and live. They all had endured for thousands of years before they could become their present shape. There wasn't an explicit rule in the sect, but if he caused large sections of ancient trees to die, then waiting for him wasn't anything good. The sunlight came into the woods through the trees, forming a scattering of light and shade. The climate of Wukong Mountain was beautiful, dry and delightful. Cold winds blew through the trees without any hint of humidity. The surroundings were all quiet. This place was very out of the way. Except for Zhuo Mo, no one else would come. Zhuo Mo calmed down and started to revolve his Ling energy, his hands moving rapidly. It was the still unfamiliar Art of Flora. After the stiffness at the beginning, the movements of his hands quickly became smooth. The fingers flickering like a flower continuously blooming. Each time he flickered out, there was a faint wave of Ling energy in the air that rippled out. Following the Ling energy ripples, thin threads of green light flew out of the trees and converged at Zhuo Mo's hands. In a short while, the green light became even brighter. Zhuo Mo stopped the spell. A green bead rolled into his palm. This was the bead that was concentrated from the essence of the plants. He put the bead away and inspected the ancient trees around him. The glow of the leaves were much dimmer and some leaves showed signs of withering. Zhuo Mo took out a jade stick from his bosom. Recorded in the jade stick was the general geography of Wukong Mountain. It had taken him a lot of time to make it. Finding the present position in the Wukong Mountain of the jade stick, he made a mark. Next time, he had to change places. This place needed a length of time to recover. Even Zhuo Mo was shocked at the dominance of Art of Flora. This was only the first level and it easily stole the vitality of the trees. If it reached any higher levels, what would it look like? Carefully putting the plant essence bead into his bosom, he prepared to leave. Within 6 hours, this plant essence bead needed to be, using the special methods of Art of Flora, released in the Ling grains. Otherwise, it would dissolve. Coming out of the wood, he followed the mountain trail, heading for his own yard. Suddenly, he heard the sound of a woman crying. Woman? He didn't stop, but as he walked forward, the sobbing became even clearer. Most of the female disciples in the sect were at the animal raising rooms and responsible for raising Ling beasts. Zhuo Mo hadn't had many interactions with them. He didn't want to cause trouble and prepared to make a detour. Suddenly he heard as the female disciple sob, she muttered, "Woo, woo mama." Zhuomo's steps stopped. A certain soft place in his heart was viciously jabbed. Mama. That strange familiarity rose again in his heart. Damn it. He cursed inside. He disliked this feeling. Each time this feeling of strange familiarity appeared, it was like his heart was blocked, unspeakably uncomfortable. Cursing was cursing, but the thoughts in his head uncontrollably turned. Puma, where's my home? Who's my mama? He was slighted, irritated, but his feet unconsciously walked towards the crying. When he went forward a few steps, he saw behind a piece of rock, there curled a female disciple. The apple-shaped face was full of tears, extremely pitiful. She was curled into a ball like a cat, her shoulders occasionally jerking. Why are you crying? It's so bothersome. Zhuo scolded ill-temperedly, sitting down on his butt. The other was like a frightened cat, shrinking back. When she saw the outer sect uniform on Zhuo's body, the fear in her eyes retreated. In a weeping tone, she timidly said, "Sorry, Shixiang." Hearing the other's timid voice, Zhuo was even more irritated. "Screw sorry. You crying is none of my business. It's so irritating." He noticed that his own attitude was overly vile and tried to suppress the vexation inside, and asked impatiently, "Say it, what is it?" "Nothing." The other's voice was like a mosquito. The fire in Zhuo's heart rose. He raised his volume and interrupted impatiently, "I told you to say it." The little girl was clearly frightened by him. This wooden-faced Shixiang was so scary. Her crying instantly subsided and she instinctively answered, "There isn't enough of the green sword grass for a bao and the others to eat." "Who's a bao?" Zhuo glanced at her and asked. "The bao. The bao is a bao. He needs to eat green sword grass every day." Who, there isn't enough green sword grass." As she narrated, she started to cry again. "Shut up." Zhuo's furious shout definitely wasn't friendly. The young girl jumped, her body instinctively shrinking back, a fearful expression on her face. Her sobs instantly stopped. Looking at this muddle-headed little girl, Zhuo rubbed his forehead in pain. Even though he hadn't been in the stables, but at least he knew the basic protocols. The amount of ling grass the ling animals needed to eat wouldn't vary too greatly. The sect had special ling fields set aside for growing ling grasses. Compared to raising ling grains, ling grasses were much easier. So it was taken care of by the female disciple who took care of the animals. Did something happen to the ling grasses? What happened? Be more detailed. Masculine, positive? Feminine, negative, shady. Chapter 10 Weeds to this strange Shixiang that had appeared out of nowhere. This little girl clearly was a bit afraid and narrated faithfully, "There's a strange grass growing in the ling fields. Xiaogua tried really hard but it still grew and grew so fast. The green sword grass is so pitiful, it grew slower and slower." Seeing the lower and lower tone of the little girl and the increasingly askew mouth, Zhuo interrupted in the nick of time. "Stop." The little girl was shocked again. She raised her head with her misty large eyes as she stared in puzzlement at Zhuo. Zhuo stood and patted the dirt off his behind. "Let's go." The little girl's face was full of question marks. After a while, she timidly asked, "Where?" The timid expression on the other's face always made Zhuo mad. The mood that had just calmed instantly became agitated again. He said extremely impatiently, "Shut up. Go where I tell you." Have to be collected. It was too meaningless to argue with a little girl. Zhuo told himself. He softened his voice, trying to make himself look calm. "Let's go look at you ling fields." Wukong sword sect might be a small sect, but even a small sparrow had all of its organs. The zoo were at the eastern peak of Wukong Mountain. Most of the outer sect female disciples lived here. This was the first time Zhuo stepped onto the eastern peak. The scenery as he passed made him awed. Compared to the levelness of the western peak, the eastern peak was steeper, the view better. Adding on that most female disciples lived here, the mountain paths were filled with flowers and grasses. Walking in the middle, it relaxed his mind. The western peak and eastern peak were very distant from each other. It was extremely rare for male outer sect disciples to come. In the woods, a small white house came into view. The little girl's composure settled and she timidly looked at Zhuemo, pointing at the house, informing, "Shixiang, that's Xiaoguo's house." Zhuemo was too lazy to speak and headed straight for the small house. When he walked in, he found that there was a patch of grass beside the little cottage. And there was a golden-horned ox whose body appeared to be made from metal lazily soaking in the sun. A bow. When Xiaoguo saw the copper ox, she happily yelled and ran over without a care. The bow. Zhuemo looked at the body of the copper ox that was filled with strength and though of the adorable name and became speechless. And then he saw the copper ox intimately use the head to gently bump at Xiaoguo and occasionally reach out to lick Xiaoguo's hand with the tongue. That large tongue covered in saliva made Zhuemo disgusted. "Where's the Ling field?" He had to interrupt. Otherwise he was suspicious that this person and ox would just keep playing. In the Ling field, Zhuemo carefully examined the plant in front of his eyes. This was a grass that he had never seen before. Just this one thing was enough for him to become serious. One had to know he had grown Ling grain for 2 years. All the grasses that showed up normally in the Ling fields, he was very familiar with. But he was certain he had never seen this grass before. After he inspected the Ling fields, his heart became even heavier. "When was it when you started to find them?" "About 3 months ago. Xiaoguo would weed every day, but they grow more and more." Xiaoguo's mouth twisted and the tears looked like they were going to brim over. Zhuemo expressionlessly looked at her. Xiaoguo cowered back a step, her crying instantly disappearing. This Shixiang was too scary. Zhuemo took back his gaze. He was shocked inside. The reproductive ability of this weed was very strong. What about the others? Many of the elder sisters' Ling fields are like this. The sisters couldn't find any solutions. She suddenly muttered, "Shixiang, could you help the sisters?" Zhuemo was too lazy to respond to her and start to ponder how to deal with this kind of weed. Farming meant confronting many questions. Getting rid of weeds was one of the most frequent questions. If a furiously growing weed appeared in the Ling fields, the question would become extremely serious. Just simply weeding clearly couldn't solve the problem. At this time in the Ling fields, it was the weeds that were flourishing, and the green sword grass rare. Zhuemo's gaze suddenly landed on the part of the weed near the ground. At that part, there were a ring of tumor-like growth. His heart moved and he inspected some other stalks of weed. He found that they too had bumps in the same places. When he saw that, he had a general understanding. The little girl didn't understand. Weeding was just cutting down the part of the plant above the ground, but the specialty of this kind of weed was that once it was wounded, it would grow even faster. If at the very beginning, proper procedures were taken such as uprooting it completely, noting like the present situation would have happened. But the problem was very serious now. It was patches and patches of weed. They definitely would have left many seeds in the soil. That was the most troublesome part. If the seeds couldn't be completely cleaned, then the trouble would continue. It really had strong vitality. Zhuemo couldn't help but praise it inside. Li Yingfeng's elegant brows furrowed. Her eyes were sharp and there wasn't any of the nimbleness usually present on her face, which was full of worry. She didn't wear the long dress and gauze clothing that normal female disciples like to wear, but a set of tight short-sleeved men battle robes. There was no allure but an unnameable handsomeness. "Shaji, we can't continue like this." A yellow-clad female disciple beside her couldn't help saying, "Based on this situation, after 2 months, we can't replenish the green sword grass." A crowd of female disciples circled around her and started to chatter and discuss. "Stop quarreling." Li Yingfeng's brows rose and she lectured icily. She had the highest cultivation among the female outer sect disciples. Normally, she was widely accepted by everyone. After the shout, the sound instantly stopped. Li Yingfeng's heart was also full of worry. The weeds were increasingly fast. The living space of the Ling grasses was increasingly smaller. If the Ling grasses couldn't be supplied, these Ling animals wouldn't have anything to eat. And the sex punishment wouldn't be lacking. Her cultivation was at the 9th level of Lianqi, 1 step away from Zhuji. Supposedly the elders of the sect had already started to pay attention to her. Once she succeeded at Juji, she would be taken as an inner sect disciple. That was certain. For such a big slip-up to occur at such a crucial time, she didn't have the appetite or desire for sleep these days. Shiji, Shiji. A female disciple panted as she ran over. Xiaogua came to Eastern Peak with a male disciple. Xiaogua seemed to have cried. Instantly, they exploded. He dared to bully Xiaogua. Humph. I want to see who dares to do so. Sisters, we can't let him off. Right? Definitely. Li Yingfeng was slightly angry. Xiaogua deeply received their care and affection. Usually, everyone treated her as a little sister. Hearing a man had made Xiaogua cry, she, of the style of bold and domineering, unhesitatingly started first for Xiaogua's residence. Seeing the situation, the others quickly followed. When Zhuemo was searching for a way to solve the matter of the weeds with their tenacious vitality, Li Yingfeng, leading a crowd of female disciples, marched over. When Li Yingfeng, who had only half believed it, saw the tear marks of Xiaogua's face, the anger inside rose up. A quick dash and she rushed in front of Zhuemo. Who are you? Li Yingfeng asked frigidly. And then she saw the other expressionlessly answer. Zhuemo. The ice on Li Yingfeng's face became even heavier. Among the outer sect disciples, she was the eldest Shiji. In front of her, everyone else was shitty and shimmy. She had never seen someone so discourteous. Immediately, without another word, she pointed with her fingers at Zhuemo. Xiaogua's face instantly became bloodless. Before she could speak, she heard a ripping sound. An extremely thin green sword energy shot at Zhuemo. Zhuemo's pupils suddenly shrunk. Before he could think, he quickly raised his right hand and at the same time, he retreated abruptly. A gold sword energy flashed. Li Yingfeng saw the gold-colored sword energy and her expression couldn't help changing. The two sword energies met in the air. Ding! A blinding light made everyone unconsciously want to close their eyes, green and gold lights scattering everyone. The two faced each other. Zhuemo stared fixedly at the other with wide eyes, the anger unable to be controlled, and rose up. Being attacked by someone out of the blue. And such a dangerous attack. If at that moment he hadn't avoided it, there definitely would be a hole in his body. The shock that Li Yingfeng received was much stronger than Zhuemo. She was the most accomplished outer sect disciple of Wukong sword sect. This would spirit sword art. Other than her, no one could accept it. It was only when her gaze landed on the ring on Zhuemo's right hand that she understood. A term jumped into her head, talisman. This didn't make her underestimate the other. Things like Ling exciting Ho, it could only be considered as a tool. Even the lowest grade talisman was a great cost for an outer sect disciple. But this only expressed that he had some wealth. What really shocked her was the other's reaction. The speed of reaction was directly linked to the level of cultivation. Even the best talismans needed cultivation as the foundation. The speed of the other's reaction was outside her expectations. This unfamiliar Shidi's cultivation definitely wasn't lower than Lianqi 8th level. A cultivation of Lianqi 8th level, it could enter the top 3 of the outer sect disciples. According to what she knew, outer sect disciples that were above the 8th level of Lianqi, other than her, there was only Wei Xing, who was the present sword servant of Luo Li Shixiang. This unfamiliar male she didn't have any memory of. That meant that he achieved Lianqi 8th level not long ago. In Wukong sword sect, achieving 8th level of Lianqi definitely wasn't a minor event. But she hadn't heard anything. Then there was only one possibility. That was, this expressionless male in front of her had concealed this event. As to why the other would conceal a matter that would elevate him dramatically, she couldn't guess. This person was very shrewd. Looking at the expressionless Zhuemo, she was slightly regretful of her previous action. Shiji, why did you act against Shixiang? Xiaogua suddenly rushed between the two, her face pale and frantic. Li Yingfeng instantly realized something wasn't right. She couldn't help ask, Xiaogua, didn't he bully you? Bully? Xiaogua paused and then shook her head. He didn't. Shixiang is helping Xiaogua look at the Ling fields. Shixiang might look scary, but he's a very good person. When Zhuemo heard this, He generally understood what had gone on and couldn't gasp at his bad luck. Calming down, he admired the strength of the woman in front of him. Suddenly remembering the rumors he heard normally, he couldn't help ask, "Is it Li Yingfeng Shiji?" "I am Li Yingfeng," Li Yingfeng answered, her expression apologetic as she bowed. "Just now, it was me that was rash and almost made a big mistake. I'm apologizing to Shidi for it here." The other's generous and sincere attitude aroused good feelings in Zhuo Mo, who hurriedly responded, "Just a misunderstanding, Shiji doesn't have to take it seriously." Li Yingfeng didn't pretend and asked solemnly, "Has Shidi found something?" Chapter 11: The Money-Grubbing Zombie Before the Two Dealt Blows. If Li Yingfeng still had suspicions, then now her suspicions greatly lessened. No matter what, with a cultivation of Lianqi 8th level, it was at the top of the outer sect disciples. And this Shidi should be like the other Shidi and chosen to grow ling grains. Zhuo Mo nodded. The vitality of this kind of weed is extremely high. If I'm not wrong, it isn't good to cut it. The wounds would provoke it to grow more. That is to say, chopping makes it grow faster. The female disciples started to chitter and chatter as they discussed. Li Yingfeng suddenly understood, so that's why. No wonder it grew more and more vigorously. If it was uprooted, would that solve it? Zhuo Mo mused. If that was done at the beginning, there wouldn't have been any problems. But right now, there probably are many seeds in the soil. It isn't easy to uproot it. Does Shidi have any good suggestions? "I need to go back and think," Zhuo Mo said. Li Yingfeng took out a small pouch and handed it to Zhuo Mo. Zhuo Mo received it with puzzlement. When he opened it for a look, he was dumbstruck. There were 5 pieces of second-grade Jingshi inside the bag. "Having offended Shidi today, I really am regretful. These pieces of Jingshi are to help for Shidi's shock. Shidi, don't blame it for being just this much." Li Yingfeng said as she stared at Zhuo Mo. Zhuo Mo was wildly happy inside, but his mouth went. Shiji is really too polite. The motion of the hand shoving the bag into his bosom, however, was extremely natural. Xiaogui jerked her mouth, staring in shock at Zhuo Mo. The other female disciples had looks of disdain. This guy was too greedy. A rock landed in Li Yingfeng's heart. She didn't want to end up at odds with such a Shidi of great potential due to today's misunderstanding. 5 pieces of second-grade Jingshi wasn't a small sum, but to her whose family was wealthy, it wasn't too much. To use such a price to solve a misunderstanding, from her perspective, it was a great bargain. "Shiji, don't worry too much. The matter of the weed can be put on Shidi." It might have been the reason of the 5 pieces of Jingshi, but the female disciples all felt that this horrid zombie male in front of them instantly had a fighting spirit. Li Yingfeng raised her hands together, smiling and accepting. "Then I'll trouble Shidi." She didn't have high hopes inside. If Zhuo Mo really had a solution, he wouldn't say something like going back to think. Zhuo Mo had never expected that he would pay attention to a minor matter today and receive 5 pieces of second-grade Jingshi for free. On one hand, he was moved at how good Li Yingfeng was at relationship. On the other, he was moved at the extravagance of her spending. Most of the Jingshi on his hands had been spent. He didn't have many left. Just as his funds were becoming tight, wealth came flying. The unexpected surprise had him floating on air. As to the disdainful stares of the female disciples, he disregarded it as air. Humming a small tune carrying a few stalks of weeds, he cheerfully left the eastern peak. "This guy's skin is so thick. My eyes are sore from glaring, but he didn't even turn red. Look at his move when he took Shiji's pouch, the vulgarity. Really makes one disgusted." Xiaogui pouted and muttered, "Shi Xiang is a very good person." As she spoke, she felt that it wasn't reliable either, and her voice became lower, instantly drowning in the ruckus of discussion. "All right." Li Yingfeng frowned and hollered. The surrounding voices instantly stopped. She looked at the thin figure that disappeared on the mountain path, who she didn't know what he was thinking. She didn't reveal Zhuo Mo's real cultivation to these gossiping women. If the other purposefully concealed it, and she spilled it, she would make a strong enemy. That wasn't very intelligent. Zhuo Mo hurried back to the small yard. After a long time, the plant essence bead would lose effectiveness. Solemnly standing in the ling fields in the yard, a green bead floated in front of him, adorably rolling. The two hands held together in front, the 10 fingers rapidly moving. The ling energy ripples once again spreading out in the air. The plant essence bead gradually dissolved, forming a pool of green water. As Zhuomo's 10 fingers flowed and moved quickly, and as the speed increased, the tips of his fingers started to glow. Each time he quickly stroked, a glowing stroke would add onto a profound and cryptic design. The green water became thousands of green strands that waved in the air. "Go!" Zhuomo gently ordered. The green hairs dissolved into the ling fields like a nymph spreading flowers. Zhuomo released a breath and let go of the ling energy at his fingertips. Based on the difficulty of the art of flora, was the most difficult among the 5 kinds of arts. Not just that the finger motions were extremely complicated, the movements of the ling energy had to be much more accurate than the other 4 arts. To practice finger motions, he left out 4 hours each day. It was extremely dull to only practice finger motions. Other than not making a mistake, flow and rhythm were the most important. His skeleton-like fingers had practiced to the point they would break, to the point that he wanted to throw up. However, he still persisted. The first level of art of flora wasn't difficult for him. As to the second level, he had no hopes in the near future. Cultivating the scripture, practicing the finger motions, caring for the ling and medicine fields. His life was extremely full. And now he had to add on examining how to get rid of weeds. Li Yingfeng didn't have any hopes, but Zhuomo didn't just only say it. He decided to find the solution to the problem. It really was a troublesome problem. In the beginning, he had concerned himself with another's business. It was because he was moved by Xiaoguo's helpless mama. The change came with Li Yingfeng's 5 pieces of second-grade jingsher. Zhuomo had lots of faults, but there was one good quality, that was, if he decided on something, he would put his all in. As to whether it was because of that mama or the 5 pieces of second-grade jingsher from Li Yingfeng, that wasn't important, was what he thought. In reality, he only had just 2 years of experience in growing crops. His knowledge of ling grasses and grains were pitiful. He knew it wasn't easy, but he wasn't afraid. At the eastern peak, Li Yingfeng was listening to a female disciple narrate. "We went to check at Dongfu. The price of the ling grasses have been continually rose recently. Like green sword grass. A while ago, it was 5 pieces of first-grade jingsher a pickle, now it's risen to 8 pieces. The prices of the other ling grasses grew even more. They are saying that the conflict at Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia has escalated, so the prices are increasing everywhere." When the female disciple was saying this, she was on the verge of tears. The other female disciples' faces were also bleak. Li Yingfeng's heart stuttered. On her face, she pretended to be calm. 8 first-grade jingsher for a pickle. The amount of ling grass that the stables needed every day was astonishing. Even if her family was wealthy, she couldn't endure such squandering. These few days, she tried to uproot these weeds, but the growth of the ling grasses didn't seem to recover at all and were still withered. In the ling fields, the weeds appeared again with astounding speed. If the situation continued, they would quickly face a situation where they had no supply of ling grass. "Sheji, the money grubber from last time came again," a female disciple said, full of disdain. "He still has the face to come? You forgot, when did he have something like face?" "That's so true." Xiaoguo pouted, her adorable apple face wrinkling into a ball as she stared in discontent at the Shiji. Li Yingfeng's eyes lit up instead and she almost rushed away. Her experience surpassed all the other shimmy greatly. If Zhuomo didn't have any news, it was normal. But coming to the eastern peak, it made Li Yingfeng think about the words that Zhuomo had said before he left. Was it? When Li Yingfeng saw Zhuomo, she was shocked. Zhuomo's hair was a mess, his eyes filled with blood, his sockets deep in his face. A strange odor came from his body. He seemed like a beggar. Other than Li Yingfeng and Xiaoguo, the other female disciples had a face full of disdain as they stood far away. "I found a solution." Zhuomo's simple words let Li Yingfeng and Xiaoguo enter into rapture. Disregarding the disdainful and suspicious gazes of the other female disciples, Zhuemo headed straight into the Ling fields. He didn't waste any words. Reaching out with a pair of skeleton-like hands, he rapidly started a spell. Li Yingfeng stared with large eyes, afraid to miss anything. The familiarity of Zhuemo's finger movements and the ease with which he controlled the Ling energy made her even more certain this shitty hid away deeply. The glowing fingertips drew an unnamed formation diagram. Go! A dry voice, harsh and dissonant. The glowing formation entered the Ling field soundlessly. That's all? But nothing changed. A female disciple shrieked. That was like a fuse. Instantly, the other female disciples that disliked Zhuemo found a target. Che, just drawing a few characters and want to fool us? Too naive. Please, be more professional when conning people. All of you shut up. Li Yingfeng roared angrily. All the voices choked off. They found that at some unknown time, Shiji's expression had become peerlessly ugly. Her face was icy. They instantly sank into cold terror. This kind of weed is yang type. I researched it. Most of the Ling grasses you plant belong to Yin. You could use Art of Earth Energy to concentrate the Yin of the Earth Energy. It would nourish the Ling grasses and can suppress the weeds. Half the work, twice the effect. Finishing, Zhuemo raised his hands towards Li Yingfeng and then left. Returning to the yard, Zhuemo dropped into slumber. Thinking that he had finished what he had wanted to do, he was content. After not sleeping or resting for these days, he already ran out of energy. When he woke up, it was the next day. The morning sunlight made his mood light. He idly ate a few things and just like normal, he started his classes for the day. The training of his finger motions were one of his prioritized studies at present. Before this, he rarely had practiced finger movements. The finger movements of Little Art of Cloud and Rain had been very simple. But of it, he had suffered greatly at the Art of Flora, his complicated finger motions. Up until now, even though he persisted in practicing every day, he could only just manage to complete the spell. It was far from familiarity. He didn't dare to relax on the practice of Art of Aged Gold. He had just gotten to the second level and needed time to consolidate and stabilize it. Roughly calculating, he had learned all 5 kinds of arts once and had his own conclusions. The 5 kinds of arts had their own emphasis. Little Art of Cloud and Rain emphasized the manipulation of Ling energy. Art of Flora, finger movements. Art of Aged Gold used consciousness. Art of Earth Energy emphasized communication and interaction. Art of Crimson Flame, crux was the calmness of mind and endurance. At this time, Zhuemo found a unique pattern. It looked as though the 5 kinds of arts were not related, but in reality, they supported each other. His strongest was Little Art of Cloud and Rain, which aided him greatly for learning the other 4 arts. And the complicated finger movement practice of Art of Flora greatly increased the skill of his finger movements, so he was even more skilled at doing Little Art of Cloud and Rain. After patrolling the Ling fields under his name, he then made rain for the medicine fields in Cold Mist Valley. He didn't have any news of Hao Min Shiji and didn't know where the 2 people had gone to be free. But he didn't have any grudges towards this unpaid job now. The only thing he hated was that there was a distance between Cold Mist Valley and his residence, and he had to spend a significant amount of time on the road every day. When he came back from Cold Mist Valley, he was shocked to find 2 people waiting outside the doorway to his little yard. Chapter 12 Art of Flora. Li Yingfeng took Xiaoguo along with her as she guarded his door. Seeing Zhuemo, Li Yingfeng visibly released a breath. Xiaoguo's apple face revealed an bashful expression. Zhuemo was slightly surprised. Why did these 2 come? His mouth smiled and said, Shiji has the time to come to my humble abode today. Such a surprise. Please come in. Finishing, he swung out his sleeve. Underneath, he sent out a spell and the door to the yard soundlessly opened. Li Yingfeng didn't decline, frankly responding, coming without an invitation, we've disturbed you. Xiaoguo tightly followed behind Li Yingfeng, but her little face was still timid. Zhuemo muttered inside, she doesn't have much interest in silly little girls. Entering the yard, Li Yingfeng saw the lush Ling grains in the yard and her eyes lit up. She couldn't help complimenting, Shi Xiang is really skilled at farming. This Ling grain's growth is the envy of others and a bountiful harvest is just around the corner. Shiji is too complimentary. Zhuo Mo casually responded. Inside, he started to ponder the reason that Li Yingfeng had come today. Towards this Shiji that he hadn't had many interactions with in the past, he felt admiration. Regardless of anything else, just her cultivation of Lianqi 9th level, it was enough to be top dog of the heap in the outer sect disciples. And her frank and honest conduct was very become to Zhuo Mo's temper. The three people sat down under a tree next to the pond. The water in the pond ripples. Occasionally, one could see a few fish darting by. When Zhuo Mo first moved into the yard, the pond was dry to the bottom. All the water presently in the pond had been slowly accumulated from him practicing little art of cloud and rain. He remembered it very clearly because when the pond became full, his little art of cloud and rain coincidentally reached the 3rd level. As to those fish, they were captured randomly when he passed by some mountain streams. Li Yingfeng took the initiative to speak of her purpose in coming. Coming today, one is to thank Shidi. The method that Shidi said, we have used and to great effect. One really needs mastery in a field. Such a troublesome problem, it really needed someone like Shidi who specialized in farming to solve. Yes, it was really effective. Everyone is so happy. Xiaoguo hurried to agree. But when she saw Zhuo Mo's face turn towards her, she instantly fell silent, her body retreating towards Li Yingfeng. Zhuo Mo took back his gaze and shook his head. Shiji is too polite. We are from the same sect. There's no need to put such a minor matter on the mind. Li Yingfeng smiled and responded, Shidi's words are extremely good. In the future, if Shidi meets a hard problem, feel free to come find me. Wherever Shiji can help, I wouldn't decline. Many thanks, Shiji. Zhuo Mo unconcernedly brushed it off. Past experiences had told him that normally, these kinds of words can't be taken seriously. Li Yingfeng gazed with burning eyes at Zhuo Mo, continuing seriously, coming today, it's to ask for Shidi's help on another matter. The meat finally came. Zhuo Mo said expressionlessly, what matter? In reality, he couldn't make expressions. Shidi's methods were extremely effective. Li Yingfeng gave a grimace. But in our crowd of sisters, only one knows the art of earth energy. Shidi, you might not know, because of the weeds previously, there was only a pitiful amount of ling grass that was produced. But the amount of ling grass that the animals need is only increasing. Originally, I had planned to go to Dongfu to buy some to fill the gap, but who knew that the price of ling grass and grains are flying up? Hearing this, Zhuo Mo's mind jumped. Price increases in ling grains. For him, it was definitely good news. Not taking into account the 50 mu of ling fields that he rented from the sect, just the 5 mu of ling grains in his yard, the harvest would be significant. He really profited this year. He gleefully calculated in his heart, completely not registering what Li Yingfeng was saying. Li Yingfeng noticed Zhuo Mo's inattentiveness and couldn't help thinking about the rumors she found out about Zhuo Mo. The shock to her that came from such a strong Shidi who jumped out of nowhere was enormous. Once Zhuo Mo left, she went around for information. She didn't only know that Zhuo Mo had a natural zombie face, and the 3rd level of little art of cloud and rain, etc., but she even managed to have a general understanding of his usual habits and conduct. Deciding not to keep being polite, she threw out the bomb. Coming today, it's to ask Shidi to weed for us. This is 10 pieces of 2nd grade jingsher. It is the goodwill of all of us. Shidi, please take it. Once again, it was a small pouch that appeared on her hand. As expected, Zhuo Mo shook and instantly focused. 10 pieces of 2nd grade jingsher? His saliva nearly slipped out. When he had sold 300 caddies of ling grains last time, he had just received 30 pieces of 2nd grade jingsher. Zhuo Mo hesitated, stating, I'm not skilled at art of earth energy, so I'm afraid I can't help much. Li Yingfeng assumed that Zhuo Mo was being polite. If he wasn't an expert, why would he have thought of using art of earth energy to get rid of the weeds? This time she had prepared well. She didn't panic, smiled and said, other than these 10 pieces of 2nd grade jingsher, We have also prepared 5 pieces of second-grade Jingshi for Shidi to recover Ling energy in hopes that the supply of Ling grass could recover in the fastest time. Zuomo's brain exploded, completely dizzy due to being hit by Li Yingfeng's Jingshi. Jingshi was the most important resource in each sect. Other than being used to purchase things, its other important use was for recovering Ling energy. The density of Ling energy in Ling veins could not compare at all to what was in Jingshi. In some large sects, those core disciples were completely built up through Jingshi. Their job each day was to suck Ling energy out of Jingshi and increase their cultivation. Zuo had never tried to extract Ling energy from Jingshi. He was poor. How could he bear it? The enemy was too strong. He instantly surrendered, promising, "Inside Shiji has an order, as a Shidi, I'll naturally rush through water and tread on fire, and will not decline." Li Yingfeng smiled. The tactic was successful. She put down the little pouch on the table, looking at Zuo and asking, "When will Shidi go?" Zuo put the little cloth pouch into his bosom in a flash, his tone solemn as he responded, "The situation is so serious. Naturally, the faster the better." Xiaoguo's mouth twisted. Following between the two people, Zuo continued to recall the major points of Art of Earth Energy. In the last few days, most of his attention had been on Art of Aged Gold and Art of Flora. After roughly practicing Art of Earth Energy, he didn't spend much time on it. He could have never thought that this Art of Earth Energy would directly connect to 15 pieces of second-grade Jingshi. Why did he practice spells? Wasn't it for Jingshi? He was upset inside. If he knew earlier, he would have practiced more. Very quickly, they reached the eastern peak. The female disciples all silently stood at the side, no one speaking. Even though Zuo didn't care about them at all, but the completely different treatment he received this time around made him feel good inside. The Ling fields infested with weeds are about 450 mu. There's about 250 mu that are much more serious. Li Yingfeng introduced. Zuo nearly tripped. 250 mu. This number scared him. Art of Earth Energy was different than Little Art of Cloud and Rain. Its effective range was much smaller, about 1 mu or so. Also, he tried already. With his first level of Art of Earth Energy, he needed to repeat more than 3 times in order to effectively stop the growth of the damned weeds. That was to say, at the least, he needed to perform Art of Earth Energy 750 times. The answer made his eyes flip and he nearly fainted. This number, it was enough to work him to death. He had thought he got a cushy job. He didn't think it was really a drudgery one. Falling from heaven into hell, the strong contrast nearly made Zuo cry. Zuo looked at the Ling fields under his feet filled with weeds and wanted to cry. There were almost only weeds left in these fields. It was hard to even find a trace of the Ling grass. Such strong weeds, with his just introductory level of Art of Earth Energy, he might have to do it 7 or 8 times to be effective. At this time, his mind was clever and a spark flashed though. He suddenly thought of a beautiful idea. Since these Ling fields were almost completely weeds, they could erase everything and plant Ling grasses again. The kind of dominant spell that Art of Flora wasn't it just perfect for the situation? Art of Flora, other than extracting the vitality and essence of the weeds, it wouldn't even let go of the seeds that were in the soil. What it extracted was the essence of plants, not Ling energy, so it wouldn't even harm the Ling fields. The more he thought, the more excited he became, so he told his thoughts to Li Yingfeng. When Li Yingfeng found out that Zuo also knew Art of Flora, she was slightly shocked. Inside, she thought that this Zuo Shidi wasn't an ordinary person. Increasingly feeling that Zuo wasn't ordinary, Li Yingfeng naturally didn't have any objections. Inside, she felt that it was very likely to succeed this time. This time, she was working against major pressure. 15 pieces of second-grade Jingshi was almost all the Jingshi she had. Quickly going through it again in his head and checking that no problems should occur, Zuo decided to do it. The 2 fists were slightly open, held in front of his chest. The fingertips glowed slightly. Taking a deep breath, the 10 fingers moved. The others only felt threads of light weaving between Zuo's 10 fingers. It was like a drawing, dazzling everyone's eyes. Only shock was left on everyone's face. Only now did they realize the uniqueness of this zombie-like Shixiang. It was a dance of light at the fingertips. That dried up and thin hands, it seemed to have a strange power and attracted everyone's gaze. The diagram that had been drawn was already extremely complicated, but the dancing fingers didn't stop. Even Li Yingfeng's face couldn't help change. Such complicated finger motions. What spell would require such complicated moves? She didn't know that it was due to the complicated nature of the finger movements that Art of Flora was the most difficult among the 5 spells and the number of people who learned it the least. Countless green threads flew up from the Ling fields and wriggled between Zuomo's palms. Unlike the restraint that happened usually, Zuomo had no hesitations now. The fear and trepidation that was present completely disappeared. The 10 fingers flipped and danced, and he pushed forward with all his Ling energy. Gradually, a very strange feeling birthed. It seemed that something was slightly throbbing at his heart. Unconsciously, the rate of movement of his 10 fingers became faster. The throbbing at his heart became even stronger. Everything in the surroundings seemed to fall away. Empty and clear, like a void, he looked on silently. The subtle connections between the dancing 10 fingers, the rhythm as the Ling energy changed, it went from barely perceptible to the surface. It was as though a paper window was poked open and his vision suddenly became clear. The rawness of Zuomo's finger motions instantly disappeared. The 10 fingers were like they had been dipped in water, abnormally smooth, flowing like the water. Of all the female disciples, Li Yingfeng's cultivation was the highest and her eyes the most knowledgeable. She was the first to detect the peculiarity. If it was said that she had just been admiring the complicated nature of Zuomo's finger movements, she was feeling completely different now. The finger movements were still beautiful, yet it didn't have that feeling of profoundness, but a kind of strange cadence. Xiaoguo's eyes widened. On the little apple face, an intoxicated, adorable expression came on. Threads of green energy floated up from the Ling grasses and weeds in the field. The space between Zuomo's 10 fingers was like the center of a whirlpool, energetically sucking in the green energy. More and more of the green energy accumulated on Zuomo's hands. Very quickly, a green and glistening plant essence bead appeared at his fingertip. The Ling fields were a patch of dry yellow, not a hind of green to be found. As a gust of wind blew across, it fell down like dust. In the blink of an eye, a vital and living Ling field had become dead ground. Everyone looked dumbstruck. Their gazes as they looked at Zuomo were like looking at a ghost. Li Yingfeng was incomparably shocked inside. If it was said that the grandiose finger motions made her entranced, then the shocking result in front of her would only make her uncontrollably feel terror. Was he really Lianqi? She suddenly found it somewhat suspicious. Chapter 13 Success Leaving the Void State. Zuomo mused upon it for a long time. Had that been a moment of enlightenment? He thought with joy and some regret. As expected, when he cast Art of Flora, the following few times, the state of emptiness didn't appear like they did the first time. But his finger movements clearly went up a step and became much more flowing. Especially the cooperation between the Ling energy and the finger movements. It was as though he found the trick to it. When his fingers moved, the Ling energy followed and changed, the two tightly connected. The grandiose finger movements, the terrifying results, it made the female disciples that were still apprehensive docilely close their mouths. Zhuo hadn't thought the effects would be this strong neither. The dominance of Art of Flora surpassed his predictions. He couldn't help but become alert inside. When he cast Art of Flora in the future, he needed to be careful. The following matters were much easier. They only needed to plow the Ling fields again before planting the Ling grasses. The method the female disciples used to plant Ling grass broadened his vision. He saw a female disciple take out a bamboo container from her waist, pluck out the cork, and a gold earthworm climbed out. She incanted the spell and the gold earthworm burrowed into the Ling fields. In a short while, the soil rolled and twisted. After 20 minutes when it stopped, the Ling fields were completely overturned. What was most amazing was that not one bit of soil had splashed out of the Ling fields. Zuemo couldn't help but be interested. What's this? It's very convenient. Li Yingfeng was both educated and kind. She said knowingly, we call them mud-turning earthworms. It isn't anything high-grade, just used to overturn the fields. But the results are pretty good. Afterwards, we'll give some to Shidi. It would be a helper in growing ling grains. Zuemo was joyous. Many thanks, Shiji. In the newly turned ling fields, the female disciples spread out the ling grass seeds. Growing ling grasses didn't have as many concerns as growing ling grains. They only had to spread it densely. After finishing seeding, Zuemo saw a female disciple preparing to cast Little Art of Cloud and Rain, and volunteered. Does it need rain? I'll do it. Return the favor. It wasn't good to take another person's things for free. Li Yingfeng was overjoyed. I heard that Shidi's Little Art of Cloud and Rain reached the 3rd level. Today, I get to have a look. Little Art of Cloud and Rain was Zuemo's most familiar spell. He almost didn't need any preparation. Just started the spell and the cloud formed, appearing above the ling fields. Silver threads gradually entered the ling fields, the air full of vitality. Everyone felt their minds become refreshed. There were very big differences between the 4th level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain and the 3rd level. Just when the rain stopped, a rainbow appeared above the ling fields. Just as everyone was complimenting, one female disciple shouted as she pointed at the ling fields, "Heavens! Look, it sprouted!" At some time, a patch of thin and light green sprouts appeared in the ling fields. Zuemo took out the plant essence bead and cast Art of Flora. It instantly dissolved into countless bunches of green thread and merged into the ling fields. The light green sprouts in the ling fields instantly became darker, their growth delightful. Shidi is just as rumored. Li Yingfeng complimented sincerely. This unknown Shidi seemed to have endless methods, and always could bring her unexpected surprises. And she found that no matter which technique that Zuemo used, there were major differences with what she had heard. What was he concealing? Li Yingfeng thought of this question again. Art of Flora, combined with Little Art of Cloud and Rain, the effect was outstanding, the effectiveness increasing. Li Yingfeng didn't care what method Zuemo used, she only hoped to produce ling grasses quickly. To increase speed for a continuous length of time, other than going to Cold Mist Valley to make rain once a day, Zuemo spent all his time at the Eastern Peak. This was the first time he received the luxurious treatment of using Jingshi to recover ling energy. The body was like a vessel. To contain more ling energy, it needed continually increasingly large containers. The simplest way to increase the size of the container was to change the body. Continuously using ling energy, the ling energy would continuously strengthen the channels and so more ling energy could be stored. The purity and density of the ling energy inside the Jingshi exceeded the ling energy drifting in the air. It was much easier to absorb and the effect it had on the channels were clearer. The next few days, Zuemo continuously repeated Art of Flora and Little Art of Cloud and Rain. The amount of work that was required for more than 400 mu of ling fields were finished by him alone. The female disciples finally saw the craziness and absorbed nature of him at work. Casing a spell, holding a Jingshi in meditation, then standing to cast a spell until all ling energy was used, then meditation. Even as they looked on from the side, they felt exhausted. But Zuemo repeated the cycle and didn't feel any dullness. Of course, Zuemo wouldn't find it dull. Such luxurious treatment, he had never thought of it even in his dreams. Such a good opportunity, if he didn't use it, was he dumb? He didn't spare any of his ling energy. Each time, he would wring the ling energy out of his body completely. Then he would take the Jingshi and suck fanatically. In these few days, he had gained much. Even if there wasn't those 10 pieces of second-grade Jingshi, he definitely would have agreed. His channels, which had never extracted ling energy in such a manner, were like dry ground meeting a surge of rain. In these short few days, the amount of ling energy in his body increased by almost 10%, his channels becoming stronger as well. Other than that, as he repeated Art of Flora over and over, his degree of proficiency increased linearly. There were signs he was nearing the 2nd level. Looking at the green ling fields, all the fields had been replanted with ling grasses. That also meant the job was finished. His heart was full of reluctance. At what time would he meet such a good thing like this? He sighed deeply in his heart. 5 days, he used up 5 pieces of second-grade jingsher. No wonder Zhuo was still wishing to continue. But luckily, 10 pieces of second-grade jingsher was enough to satisfy the yearning in his heart. The stone in Li Yingfeng's heart landed. Even though the price was high, she had managed to solve a troublesome problem. And she had met a strong shitty. She was very satisfied. Work and relax, that was the right way. Returning to the yard, Zhuo's wallet was bulging and his mood relaxed. But his studies each day, he never stopped. Even though the efficiency of meditation was far from being able to compare with using jingsher, but Zhuo still persisted. The ling energy in the jingsher might be pure and easy to absorb, but it was slightly strong. It was slower to meditate and absorb ling energy, but it was very gentle. In the long run, it was easy to leave behind hidden dangers by relying too much of jingsher. Those sects with thick bases and foundations had many methods to solve the dangers, but to Zhuo, those were far away. Of course, the most important thing was Zhuo didn't have that many jingsher to squander. Other than that, right now he was focusing on Art of Aged Gold and Art of Flora. Art of Aged Gold was at the 2nd level, and it wasn't far before Art of Flora would also break. If both of these could reach the 3rd level, and adding in the 4th level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain, it was enough for him to qualify as a ling plant farmer. By that time, the jingsher will roll in. In the next few days, his mood was great. Each day, he lightheartedly ran over to Cold Mist Valley each day to make rain. The ling herbs in the medicine fields were growing well, the effect of the 4th level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain clear. The ling herbs seemed to have more vitality than before. Each time when he stated to make rain, the ling herbs in the fields would neatly follow and sway as though they were rejoicing. Zhuo's mood became cheerful whenever he saw these ling herbs dancing. To this job that was forced upon him, his unwillingness had decreased. The medicine fields in Cold Mist Valley were 3rd-grade ling fields. The intelligence in these ling herbs greatly surpassed normal plants. The misfortunes of the past swept away. His life became bright once again. Just as usual, he made a round of inspections before leaving. After making sure that nothing happened, he then left Cold Mist Valley. Not long after he left Cold Mist Valley, he suddenly heard the sound of people talking in the front. Old Black is pretty misfortunate. The ling grains are infected with this strange disease. He probably won't get even 1 grain this year. Next year, he might not even get to plant the ling grains. He has a family of the old and young, his days will become hard. Oh, it's fate. I'm just worried if this strange disease will spread. If we get infected, that would be terrible. So true. Heavens protect. I'm still depending on this year's harvest to exchange for a sword scripture. Me too. Strange disease? Zhuo's heart jumped. Planting ling grains, what people were most afraid of were those unnameable strange diseases. Once it occurred, it basically was a loss for the entire year. These 2 years, Zhuo had personally seen several Shixiang, due to bad luck, become unable to even pay the rent for the ling fields to the sect and were thrown out of the sect. A while ago when he made rain for Old Black, his ling grains were growing well, so why did they suddenly become infected with a strange disease? Zhuo felt it a bit strange. If one had to say who had it the hardest in the sect, it was probably Old Black. He had a family. His son supposedly had some innate talent and had been admitted into a small sword sect. The tribute he needed to give each year to the sect wasn't a small amount. Adding on the different material and jingsher needed for cultivation, the spending was enormous. Old Black had a cultivation of Lianqi 5th level. He rented a full 200 mu of ling fields. All his time was spent on growing ling grains. These 10 years, his cultivation hadn't increased one bit. But even so, the jingsher he earned was just barely enough. This year, Old Black was especially hardworking. It was rumored that his son was at the gate of Lianqi 7th level. For his son to push through the big jump of the 7th level, he needed a lot of jingsher. To give to the sect for the sect elders to give some extra attention, it was an unwritten rule. Other than that, Old Black had put hopes on another method. Places without Ling veins, the amount of Ling energy in the air was extremely low. If he relied on those Ling energy to change into the Ling energy inside his body, it was extremely slow. Xiozha would have the wealth usually use two kinds of methods. One was using Ling grains for a long period. There weren't high levels of Ling energy in the Ling grains, but the effect was gentle and easily absorbed. The other method was directly extracting Ling energy from the Jingshi. This was also the fasted method. The suspicious expression on his face became even heavier, as though he had encountered something impossible. He shook his head, his expression still suspicious, and his hand landed on a withered Ling grain. Zhua Mo, who also knew art of aged gold, suddenly became alert. He knew the most crucial time had come. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.